Hey everyone, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of you for helping me reach 100 subscribers. I honestly couldn't have done this without your love, support, and constant encouragement. Every like, comment, and subscribe means a lot to me. Now let's keep this journey going. Our next target is 200 subscribers, and I know we can do it together. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's grow as a family. Thank you once again.
Luffy was supposed to be broken. Years of marine captivity were meant to crush his spirit, erase his dream, and silence the name of D. But they made one fatal mistake. They let him survive. Now free, Luffy sets sail not as a carefree boy chasing adventure, but as a captain carrying scars no one sees. The world thinks they know Monkey D. Luffy. They don't. He's building something bigger this time, a crew strong enough to rival Whitebeard himself. And when the Marines finally face him again, they'll realize the truth. They didn't stop the Pirate King. They created him. Disclaimer. This story do not belong to me. The author is This Captain Wears Red by OPWonders, respect to author.
Chapter 21, Laboon the Giant Whale. It was clear to the entire crew that there was something wrong with Luffy. All throughout their time on Logatown and even after they'd left, Luffy had been nothing but smiles. When Sabo had shown up, he'd been in an even better mood if possible. It was when Sabo said they needed to talk that things changed. After Luffy had gone inside the galley, the small crew of 4 had gathered at the front of the Mary, quietly speculating what could be happening. They knew that whatever was being talked about had to do with something bad, that much was obvious. What that bad thing was, however, they had no idea. Speculation included a family member passing to something happening with the Whitebeards, but none of their theories had much evidence. When a half hour had passed and Luffy had come out to grab the Den, they had all seen the startling difference in their captain for the first time. His skin was much paler than it had been when he'd left, and there was a deep frown on his face. His eyes were glazed, as if in deep thought, and when he'd noticed their staring, they were all met with a look of such raw emotion that it threw them all. As quick as it had happened though, it was gone. Luffy had grabbed the snail and gone back into the kitchen, leaving them with more questions than answers. Another 10 minutes passed as they waited, glancing occasionally to the kitchen. They had thought of eavesdropping but had quickly dashed that idea as quickly as they'd had it. They may be curious, but they would never invade Luffy's privacy like that, not after everything he's done so far for them. When Luffy came out again, snail in hand, it seemed like whatever conversation had been happening was now over. Sabo came out only a minute later, confirming that idea, but like Luffy, the blonde didn't look unaffected by whatever had been talked about. His smile and carefree attitude was gone, replaced with the same frown as Luffy. Unlike Luffy, though, there was a concern and worry in his eyes that they could all see was clearly directed towards Luffy. It didn't pass any of their notice that the blonde was continuously sending the young captain the same worried glances that they were. Luffy seemed to expertly ignore all of those looks though as he joined his crew at the front of the ship, Sabo following close behind. Luffy, we're almost at the entrance. Nami finally said, breaking the tension. The rain had yet to even slow, but like before, no one was paying it any mind. Luffy hummed with a nod, eyes watching the incoming mountain carefully. That means I've got to head out now then, Sabo said with what sounded to be a regretful sigh. The crew looked to him, and then Luffy, who didn't seem to be bothered by the words like they expected him to be. For how warm a welcome Sabo had gotten, they had expected a goodbye to be just as full of love and concern. They were proven wrong when Luffy remained stone-faced. Luffy, I'm not going to force you to do anything, Cammy knows you wouldn't listen anyway, but you really should stop and take the time to at least think about what I've told you. If I hear anything else, you and Ace will be the first to hear about it, promise. Are you sure you don't want me to stay and help get you through Reverse Mountain? You could take the time to go rest, Sabo said. Luffy knew his brother wasn't lying about keeping them informed, and he knew he was only worried, hence his reiteration of his offer to stay and help, but Luffy had to do this himself. Luffy knew he was being a little childish, but after hearing about Haru coming back, Luffy couldn't help but be irrationally angry at his blonde brother. He would never hate Sabo, but he was angry that he'd kept something so important from him for so long. The rational part of his brain understood why Sabo had done it, and really, if he thought about it, he wasn't actually angry at Sabo. He was angry about everything else, angry that Haru was still alive, angry Haru was still working in facilities, angry at the world government for allowing facilities, angry Haru was going to paradise again, but he was not angry at Sabo. The crew could still feel the tension that seemed to double the more Sabo spoke, but they said nothing, expertly staying out of it. Not all of them had siblings, but they all knew better than to insert themselves in what looked to be a spat between the two brothers. I'll be fine. I'll miss you though, Luffy finally said after a sigh, turning to look at his blonde brother. And just like that, his anger towards Sabo was gone. Sabo looked relieved to hear Luffy speaking to him again and smiled a little. I'll miss you too, Lu. You stay safe and try not to get into too much trouble, please. For the sake of my health. The blonde asked, knowing it was a useless request. If Luffy wanted to do something, he would do it, no matter how much it made the people he knew worry. It was nice meeting all of you. Until next time, Sabo said to the crew, giving them a smile and another bow before walking over to the Mary's railing and jumping over it, down to the tiny boat that awaited him. Luffy and the others went over and the straw-hatted teen waved exuberantly, his bad mood gone as he smiled and saw his brother off. The crew wasn't quite sure how to handle the sudden change in moods that their captain was experiencing, but they weren't going to question them lest they have to face the Luffy they'd seen earlier. When Sabo was a ways away, Luffy turned to them next, smiling softer than before, but a smile nonetheless. Let's go to the Grand Line, he told them firmly. They all returned his smile with one of their own, nodding. Hey, we reached the Red Line. What? The crew all ran to Luffy at the shout, everyone looking to see a giant wall of rock in front of them. This can't be for real. The damn ocean really is flowing up the mountain. Zoro exclaimed, looking through binoculars as the water went up the mountain. Nami had mentioned earlier that she'd not only heard rumors but saw on the map that there were canals leading to the mountain and that must be their way up. Zoro had been skeptical of course, but Nami merely insisted that that was the only way and Sanji had agreed wholeheartedly with her. Luffy hadn't cared one way or the other, as long as they made it into paradise. Usopp, however, had been too focused on the rudder and the strong current to have much of an opinion on how they were getting up the mountain. They had drawn the sails per Nami's request after that, and that was when Luffy had spotted the Red Line. The entrance to the Grand Line. Nami said softly in awe. I can't see the top because of the clouds. Usopp said, noticing that the mountain went up so high that it reached the clouds. A sudden jerk of their ship nearly flung Luffy off, but he managed to save himself before that could happen. He had plenty of experiences with rough waters so he wasn't too concerned. We're being sucked in, Usopp said, looking to see they were now being rushed towards the mountain due to the current. Hold the rudder steady, Nami ordered. We're on it, Usopp and Sanji said, running inside to do as told. Nami, where's the entrance? We're gonna crash into the rocks if we keep going this way. Zoro said, looking to see that that was where they were headed at the moment. Nami, what do we do? Usopp asked, he and Sanji doing their best to hold the rudder steady. Keep going straight ahead, Nami yelled, a smile on her face. Luffy could feel her confidence, not a hint of hesitation, and smiled as well. He didn't know what they were doing, but he trusted his navigator. Are you serious? Usopp asked incredulously. Just do it, Nami said again as Luffy steadied himself beside her. Is that the canal entrance? Luffy asked her, having seen the same crack in the mountain that she had. Most likely, she shouted over the rain, holding herself steady on the Mary's railing as she stared ahead. It was then that Zoro looked through the binoculars, spotting the water flowing upwards. We gotta make our way through those water gates just right. Otherwise, the ship'll be busted into pieces. Nami told them all. We're getting off course. More to the right. Right. Luffy shouted to Usopp and Sanji. The right. Go starboard. Usopp shouted to Sanji, the two struggling to do so. At that moment, the rudder completely snapped, Usopp and Sanji falling to the ground. Luffy, Nami, and Zoro all shrieked at the sight, but Luffy was quick to notice that they were now very quickly heading towards one of the water gates. Gum Gum Balloon, Luffy shouted, jumping off the ship, in between the Mary and the gate as he inflated. The cushion he created was enough to bounce the ship back in the right direction. Luffy, grab on, Zoro called, holding a hand out for the rubber man. Luffy didn't hesitate to deflate, immediately stretching his hand out to Zoro's and grabbing on, slingshotting himself towards the swordsman and safely back onto the Mary. Usopp and Sanji were cheering happily in the kitchen while Nami sighed in relief. Now that they were back on course, they swiftly made their way up the mountain, the water carrying them along. Now that there was no rudder to take care of, Usopp and Sanji joined them at the front of the ship to watch as they neared the top. No longer was it raining. The wind was still blowing harshly around them, but that was more because of the speed they were traveling at rather than the storm they'd been in previously. Now it's just a straight shot to the summit. Nami called out gleefully. Awesome, Luffy called out as he watched. Beside him, Zoro was smiling happily as well, not saying anything, and behind him, Usopp and Sanji were dancing still. We're in the clouds, Luffy exclaimed, climbing onto the Mary's figurehead despite the dangers. For the first time since they'd been to Logatown, the sun shone brightly. Now that they were above the clouds, there was nothing to block it anymore. They were nearing the top of the mountain and they could clearly see the summit where all the canals converged, spraying water like a geyser. Look, the summit. It's the summit, Nami cheered. The spray from the water covered them as they finally reached the summit, flying momentarily in the air. Yahoo! Luffy whooped, holding onto the Mary's head. Everyone watched with smiles as they successfully landed on the canal leading downward, plummeting to the bottom of the mountain as fast as they'd climbed it. The One Piece is up ahead somewhere. Go! Luffy cheered. All we gotta do now is go down. Nami yelled. Spirits were high and Luffy basked in everyone's good emotions, his smile going from ear to ear. Even though he'd just found out Haru was also going to be back in paradise, Luffy couldn't find it in himself to care right now. Not when he was finally back to the Grand Line. Paradise, Luffy said wistfully, his voice drowned out by the rushing wind and water. Even Usopp wasn't scared. The usually fearful liar was wearing as big a smile as everyone else as he held on tightly to the mast to keep from falling off. Luffy, still on Mary's figurehead, held onto his hat tightly as he watched the path in front of them. It seemed like it was a straight shot to the bottom, but when he sensed a faint presence he thought otherwise. Amongst all the good feelings coming from his crew, there was a faint despair trying to make its way into Luffy, and with how muted the emotion was, Luffy determined that whatever was feeling this emotion was more than likely an animal. Did you hear that? Zoro asked, his voice hard to hear over the wind. Huh, what did you say? Nami asked, still smiling widely as she turned to look at Zoro. Didn't you hear that strange sound? Zoro asked again. Luffy listened closer now, hearing it too. Isn't it the wind? There must be a lot of unusual landforms. Nami said, still unperturbed. I think there's something down there. An animal. Luffy called back to them. An animal? Sanji asked. Usopp pulled down one of his magnifiers over his eye and looked through the clouds. What's that? He asked as he tried making out the thing through the fog. Nami-san, I see a mountain up ahead. Sanji called, having climbed up the rigging to get a better view. A mountain? That can't be, she said in confusion. Shed made sure to pore over her map of Reverse Mountain, and there was nothing about another mountain at the bottom of this one. But it's really there, Sanji said, pointing ahead to what he was seeing. After passing the Twin Capes up ahead, there should be nothing but ocean. Nami said a little worried now. It's not a mountain, it's an animal. Luffy insisted again, this mountain becoming visible to everyone now. They got close enough to the bottom that the clouds cleared, showing them a large black mass. An animal. That looks like a black wall to me. Usopp shrieked. It's a whale. Zoro yelled, hanging onto the railing. AWWW whale. Usopp shrieked again, his fear drowning out any happiness that had been there moments ago. Should we fight? Sanji asked. Idiot. There's no way we can fight that. Nami yelled, her own fear rising. BBB but, our path is blocked. Usopp said, not knowing any other solution. Wait a second, if it looks like a wall from this close. Where are its eyes? Sanji asked, a feeling of dread forming now. That's right, it's possible that he may not have noticed us. Nami said in relief, but unless we do something, we'll run into it. Zoro reminded them, we can get through to the left. Port, hard to port, he called, but the rudder is broken. Usopp yelled back fearfully, staring at the broken remains of said rudder. Do something, I'll help too, Zoro said, running over to help. Oh, yeah, I've got an idea, Luffy yelled, running off and leaving behind a confused Nami. Luffy, what are you doing? She didn't get a response as her captain ran inside. Usopp, Sanji, and Zoro were all struggling to move the broken piece of wood that was their rudder while Nami held on tight to the railing in fear. As Luffy ran into the Mary, he quickly loaded and then lit a cannon, waiting for the inevitable boom. He could feel the fear of his crew rising, very nearly influencing him, but he did his best to block it out. It'd do him no good to be terrified right now when they needed him. With a loud boom, Luffy let out a relieved sigh, wiping the sweat from his forehead as he felt the Mary begin slowing down. His relief was short-lived though as a loud thunk behind him clued him into the fact that Mary's figurehead had snapped off and was now sitting outside the door behind him. Ack, my special seat, he shrieked in a mixture of surprise and anger. There was a momentary silence as everyone came to terms that they weren't going to die just yet. Let's get out of here before he does notice us, Zoro called, jumping up from the floor where he'd been trying to move the rudder. Is his body too big that he didn't notice the cannon attack? Sanji asked, also joining the swordsman. Who knows, but let's not stay to find out. Zoro answered, Usopp coming to help row the Mary out of the way of the whale. It was too late though, they didn't make it far at all before the whale was opening its mouth, letting out a loud roar. Ah, my ears, Sanji yelled in pain as he and Usopp struggled to move the large oar together. Paddle, just paddle, Usopp repeated like a mantra. We have to get away from him. Zoro yelled next, the three of them in a panic. Luffy, Nami said, fear in her eyes as they began sailing past the large eye of the whale. Luffy had walked back to the front of the ship, seeing the spot where Mary's head used to be. Maybe he was drawing all that pent-up anger from finding out about Haru, but at that moment as he glared into the whale's eye, Luffy felt nothing but rage as he thought about the loss of his favorite seat. You, what the hell did you do to my special seat?
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
Luffy roared, surprising Nami with the heat behind his words. There wasn't even a second for Nami to explain what had happened before Luffy had flung his fist into the whale's eye, much to everyone's fear and anger. Dumbass. They roared in unison, tears streaming down their faces at the thought that they weren't getting away now. When the whale didn't immediately move its eye to look at them, they sighed in relief, but just as they did that, the eye moved, looking directly at them. How was that? Bring it on, you bastard. Luffy roared, readying his fists again, only to be kicked down by Usopp and Zoro. Shut up already, you idiot. They barked. Luffy reined in his anger enough to not yell at his crewmates, but he was still ready to fight the whale. After another pause, the whale opened its mouth, surprising the crew again. What? Nami asked, noticing that the whale was now sucking in the surrounding water, and by extension, the Mary. With the sudden current, the Mary rocked harshly, knocking Luffy into the air. Before he was able to land safely back onto the deck, the Mary was carried away into the whale's mouth, leaving nothing but ocean below him. Luffy. He heard his crew call out to him in concern, but Luffy was able to save himself, stretching his arm out to one of the whale's teeth and clinging onto it. From there, he climbed up to the top of the whale where he sat down to rest. What do I do now? They've been eaten. The rage was back twofold as Luffy stood on the whale's head, immediately beginning to punch it in the head. Hey, you! Spit them out! Give everyone back to me! Spit them out! I'm saying give them back! Luffy yelled, fury on his face as he continued punching over and over. As he was doing this, the whale began going under the water, knocking Luffy down. You jerk! The young captain yelled, now stomping on the whale. You're diving into the water, aren't you? Stop it! Hey, I'm telling you to stop! Hey, please wait! Give me my friends back! Hey, I said stop it! We're gonna go on adventures! They're precious to me! Give them back! In his yelling, the water was getting closer and closer to Luffy, but it was then he noticed a hatch on top of the whale's head. Without hesitation, the boy walked over to it, opening it and peering inside. Seeing that there was nowhere else to go, Luffy shrugged before jumping inside. He only had a second to wonder why the inside of the whale had metal walls before everything was shaking and jolting. Not able to get good footing, Luffy was bounced around the walls like a bouncy ball, unable to do anything to stop it. What's going on? Why? Dizzy. I'm dizzy. Luffy yelled, eyes spinning as he was flung down the hall. Eventually, he was spat out of the tunnel and into a larger room with a river of water on the end. What is it this time? The sea, a river, a channel. He only had until he finished talking to wonder before everything was shaking again, but this time, the room began tilting up, Luffy falling down despite his efforts to run up instead. As he slid down the floor, he noticed two presences near wherever he was falling, and seeing as they had no clue he was coming, he thought he should warn them. I can't stop, he yelled to them, now running full force towards them, seeing as there was nothing else he could do. He only saw the two for a split second before he ran into them. The door behind them burst open with the force of the three of them. As they began falling towards what looked like greenish water, the two began screaming loudly. This isn't good, Miss Wednesday. It's a sea of gastric acid below us. The man yelled, the woman only screaming in terror. Luffy. The teen looked over at the sound of Zoro's voice, grinning widely at the sight of the Mary. Hey, so everyone's okay. In any case, help me. Luffy called as he and the other two with him plummeted into what was apparently gastric acids. Even though it wasn't entirely seawater, it was still enough to weaken Luffy as he struggled to swim to the top. It didn't matter though, because Zoro was there soon enough, grabbing him and pulling him back onto the Mary. They also got the girl and guy Luffy had knocked into the water out as well, depositing them by Luffy as the captain sat on the railing. It's calmed down. The whale's quiet now, Nami noticed, looking at the waves and seeing that they weren't as rough as before. Seems like it. Now, we did save you guys for the time being, but who are you? Zoro asked the guy and girl on the deck. Sanji was fawning over the girl, but Nami and Usopp were giving them skeptical looks. Mr. 9, they're pirates. The girl said to Mr. 9 Feet. I know, Miss Wednesday. But if we talk to them, they should understand, perhaps. Mr. 9 replied. Luffy took the time to check their auras, seeing that the girl's was as bright blue as could be, maybe even the brightest he'd ever seen it, while the guy's was only a shade darker blue than what was normal. You thugs are still around. Everyone turned to look to the old man that had spoken. Don't make me say this yet again. I won't let you lay a finger on Laboon so long as I'm alive. The old man shouted in determination. He's back, Usopp muttered. Who's that Pops? Luffy asked in confusion. Even if you say so, we can't leave. Miss Wednesday said, and her emotions reminded Luffy of Nami when he'd first met her. Taking down this whale is our mission. We won't let you lay a finger on our whale hunting this time. Mr. 9 continued, the two standing up, holding their large weapons. We'll open an air vent in his stomach. Let's go, baby. Mr. 9 shouted, the two of them aiming the bazooka-like weapons upwards. Roger. Miss Wednesday yelled back. With that, the two shot cannonballs out of their weapons. Before it could do any damage, the old man ran towards them, jumping into the air and grabbing the cannonballs out of the sky. They exploded on impact, surprising the crew. That Pops jumped straight into the bullets. Usopp said in a mixture of awe and surprise. Could it be that he protected the whale? Sanji asked, feeling much the same way as Usopp. Stop this pointless resistance. If you want to protect the whale that badly, go right ahead. We'll turn it into food for our town. Mr. Nine said, his emotions changing darkly for a second while Miss Wednesday laughed beside him, and when Mr. Nine finished talking, he joined in on the laughter. Luffy turned to frown at the two. He didn't know what was going on here, but what he was seeing, he didn't like. What's going on? Nami asked, as confused as everyone else was. She didn't get an answer though as Luffy's anger returned and he stood up, raising both his fists into the air. Huh? Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday asked, noticing the menacing aura in front of them. They only briefly saw Luffy's rage-filled features before they were both punched into each other, knocking them unconscious. Luffy? Usopp asked, surprised by the display of strength. I just felt like hitting them. Luffy tried explaining, looking at Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday again. He had bad feelings. Luffy continued, pointing to Mr. Nine. The crew didn't ask any more than that, looking to the man Luffy was talking about with frowns. They still didn't know all that much about Luffy's abilities, but they weren't going to ask about that now. Once that was over with, the old man swam to the small island-shaped boat nearby, everyone on the Mary joining them. They had Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday tied up to keep them from causing trouble, but with them being unconscious and with Luffy angry, they weren't really something that needed to be worried about. I thank you for saving me, but why? The man asked. I wasn't trying to save you. I just don't like them. Luffy said. Huh? The old man asked, not understanding. He didn't get an answer though, so he moved on. Luffy wasn't paying much attention anyway, more preoccupied with the tree he was attempting to climb. Because Usopp was trying to pull him down at the same time. Luffy, what are you trying to do? Stop it. Hey, Luffy, stop it. Luffy ignored him though, still trying to climb. Say, who are these guys? What are you doing inside this whale? Luffy asked, ignoring Usopp. They're thugs from a nearby town. They're after the whale meat. The old man answered, expertly ignoring Usopp as he tried pulling Luffy from the tree. What are you trying to do? Usopp asked desperately. If they capture Laboon, it can feed the townspeople for at least 2 to 3 years, so. The man continued, trailing off. Laboon? Nami asked now. It's the name of this whale. It's the world's largest whale, called the island whale, which live only in the West Blue. I won't let them have him as food. There's a reason he keeps hitting himself on the red line and howling at Reverse Mountain. He said, not looking at any of them. A reason? Luffy asked, still clinging to the tree. Yeah, he's a whale with a human heart. And he's been devotedly waiting for a certain pirate group, for 50 long years. They all listened intently as the old man told them the story of how he'd come to take care of Laboon. How the whale had traveled with pirates and how they'd left Laboon here for his safety, promising to return in a few short years. That was 50 years ago. He finished with a sigh, looking to the painted sky above them. 50 years? Luffy asked in surprise. Laboon has been waiting for those guys for 50 years. Usopp asked with wide eyes. Is that why he continues to howl at the wall, hitting himself on it? Nami asked. Yeah. ///////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////// I'm surprised that he's still alive, having a hole like this inside his body. Zoro admired. The Mary was following the old man, Crocus, ship as he led them through a canal to what he promised would be outside. Is this also your playful mind? Sanji asked louder to Crocus. The man was lounging on his lounge chair reading, not paying them much attention as they drifted along. A doctor's playful mind, he replied, not even turning to address them. Doctor? Luffy asked, rechecking the old man's color and emotions out of habit. He'd checked Crocus already, finding that he was a normal blue with normal emotions, but to hear that he was a doctor still worried Luffy enough that he checked again. Doctors may not be as scary to him as they once used to be, but that didn't mean they didn't spark an anxiety that left him constantly weary around whoever claimed to be one. I may not look it, but I'm a doctor. I also ran a clinic on the Cape a long time ago. It was just for a few years, but I was a ship's doctor. Crocus explained to them, still reading his paper. Luffy, who was sitting on the remaining neck of Mary's figurehead, nodded to the man, not saying anything more on the subject. He had the idea of asking the man to join their crew. They did need a doctor after all, but Luffy couldn't find it in himself to ask. Crocus wasn't a bad guy, and from the few minutes Luffy'd been near him, he seemed pretty cool, but there was something holding him back. That anxiety, the ingrained fear, kept him from asking the simple question he wanted to ask. A doctor, huh? That's why the inside of the whale's body is like this. Then this is from the treatment. Usopp said, hands on his hips as they watched Crocus stand from his chair and walk over to a ladder on the wall. Luffy didn't know what treatment Usopp was talking about, but he didn't bother asking as Crocus reached the top of the ladder, turning to address them. That's right. When the whale is this big it's impossible to treat it from the outside. He told them, turning around on the ledge he was on and walking over to a crank. I'm going to open the doors. He announced next, turning the crank. They watched as the big metal doors in front of them slowly cracked open, showing the bright sunshine once again. There it is, the real sky. Luffy cheered as the Mary drifted outside the whale and back into the fresh air. As cool as being inside a whale had been, he much preferred being outside. So it's really been 50 years then. Those pirates sure are keeping him waiting a long time. Usopp said in astonishment, surprised Laboon was still waiting around after all this time. Idiot. This is the Grand Line. They're dead. No longer how long he waits, they won't come back. Sanji said, taking a puff from his cigarette. Yeah, it's true that 50 years ago the Grand Line was an uncharted sea more terrible and chaotic than it is now. Nami agreed, arms crossed over her chest as she spoke. Why are you talking so hopeless? You don't know that for sure. They might come back, Usopp insisted, running up between the two in the pirates' defense. It's a very touching story. A whale continues to believe in the promise his friends made. Right, Pops? Usopp asked Crocus next, thinking the man would be on his side. Yeah, but reality is cruel. I confirmed it using reliable information. They ran away, from the Grand Line. Crocus admitted, looking off into the ocean as he told them this. Luffy felt Usopp's hope diminish at the news, visibly wilting. Can't be. Don't tell me, they left without him. Usopp asked, now angry as he turned to look at Laboon. Ran from the Grand Line. Does that mean they went through the calm belt alive? Nami asked curiously. Even if they are alive, they'll probably never come back here. Seasons, weather, current, wind direction, they're all random. Common sense is useless in the Grand Line. The terror of the Grand Line takes over the weak minds in an instant. Crocus said sternly, meaning every word. Luffy knew the man's words to be true, having seen plenty of pirates realize just what the New World and the Grand Line were like. So having weak minds, they ran away from the sea without keeping their promise in order to save their asses. Sanji asked, feeling angry himself now. If the pirates had died, he would have understood after all, the dead can't fulfill their promises, but it turned out the pirates were alive. And had willingly broken their promise. They abandoned this whale, when he's been waiting 50 years. That's cruel. Usopp shouted, just as angry. If you know that, why haven't you told him? That whale can understand what people say, right? Nami asked, feeling bad for Laboon. I did tell him, everything. It's since then that he started howling at Reverse Mountain and that he started slamming his body against the red line. It's as if he's insisting that they'll come back from the other side of the wall anytime now. Crocus explained. What a whale. When there's no point in waiting. Usopp said, voice soft in amazement. He refuses to accept my words because if he accepts them, it means that there is no point in waiting. He's more afraid of that than anything. He's from the West Blue. There's no way of going back there now. That's why those pirates he came here with are his only buddies and hope. Crocus said, looking to them now as he spoke. But you know, it's true that he's a poor whale, but in a way, you were also betrayed, right? Haven't you done enough for him already? Sanji asked, taking another drag of his cigarette as he side-eyed Crocus. Look at the scars on his forehead. If he continues to hit his head like that, he'll die without doubt. It's a strange relationship, but I've been with him for 50 long years. I can't just stand by and watch him die now. Crocus said, determined. A sudden yell from Luffy made everyone turn in surprise. What's that idiot doing? Sanji asked, eyebrow raised as he watched Luffy run across the deck, the Mary's mast dragging behind him, sails and all. We look away for 1 second. Zoro said, arms crossed and eyebrow raised as well. Luffy ran off the Mary and onto Laboon, running full speed up the side of the mountain with their mast. Is he pretending he's climbing or something? Usopp asked. Gum gum. Flower arrangement. With the yell, Luffy slammed the mast right into one of Laboon's still bleeding scars. Isn't that the mast? Zoro asked, everyone, not having truly realized what Luffy had been carrying until then. Yep, it's from our ship. Sanji answered without a hint of hesitation, not even turning to look at where there was now a splintered stump of wood in the middle of their deck. It's the main mast. Hey, don't break the ship, Usopp screeched, all of them finally realizing the full extent of what Luffy had done. Meanwhile, Laboon was starting to tear up from the pain of having a mast stuck into his fresh wound, a loud cry escaping him as he thrashed around in the ocean. With his size, the waves around them picked up again due to this, tossing the Mary back and forth. What the hell are you doing? All 4 of the Strafuts cried. Even Crocus was dismayed by what he was seeing. Even though Laboon was thrashing, trying to remove the mast and Luffy by extension Luffy didn't let it happen, instead holding on tight as Laboon launched himself out of the water and into the air. Instead of landing back in the water, Laboon went crashing straight into the rocky cliff of Reverse Mountain, throwing Luffy and the mast off. Wah! Hey kid! Crocus screamed, realizing that Laboon must have crushed, and subsequently killed, Luffy with that move. Don't worry. He doesn't die even when crushed. Nami called over to Crocus, not worried herself. She was lounging against the Mary's railing, watching how this would play out now that the waters were calming down. It was useless to stop Luffy now, after all, he'd already gone and attacked Laboon. Another cry from Laboon drew their attention as they saw the whale rear back in the water, blood gushing from where he'd pushed the mast and further into his wound, causing more pain. "Ha, dummy," Luffy taunted from where he sat on Reverse Mountain's cliff, dirty from being crushed into the rock. With another roar, Laboon tried charging his head at Luffy again only for the rubber man to jump over him. Laboon, undeterred, slapped Luffy out of the sky with his tail, knocking the teen right back into the mountain. Stopping himself from falling, Luffy righted himself and immediately spun a punch back at Laboon, aiming for the whale's eye, but again, Laboon dodged, slapping Luffy into the side of the lighthouse before the hit could land. "What does he think he's doing?" Usopp asked, a little worried as he watched Luffy get thrown around by the whale. Once again, Laboon effortlessly dodged a kick and sent Luffy back into the lighthouse with his tail. "Luffy, what the hell are you trying to do?" Zoro asked, crouched as he kept himself steady on the rocky waves. Luffy didn't answer from where he sat, sitting against the lighthouse. Laboon wasn't done though and he began to charge at the rubber man once again, intent on still fighting. "It's a draw." The words stopped Laboon in his tracks, his anger disappearing as he froze. Luffy stood, smiling now as he picked up his fallen hat and put it on his head. "I'm strong, aren't I? You wanna defeat me, don't you? Our fight isn't over yet. So we have to fight again. Your buddies are dead, but I'm your rival forever. We definitely have to fight again in order to decide who's the strongest. After going around paradise, we'll come back to see you again. When I come back, let's fight again," Luffy told Laboon. Everyone watching, Crocus included, smiled as they heard Luffy's words, realizing now what he'd been up to. Tears in his eyes again, Laboon reared his head back and roared loudly one more time. Chapter 22, Hidden Motives. This is good. This is the symbol of our promise to fight again. Until we come back, don't remove that mark by hitting your head. Got that? Luffy, covered in white, yellow, and red paint and holding a large paintbrush, yelled to Laboon, admiring his work. On the whale's forehead, covering the scars, was a sloppy straw hat pirate mark that Luffy had painted. With a roar of agreement, Luffy smiled widely. All right. With that, Luffy left the whale to go get cleaned up on the Mary, Usopp already hard at work at fixing the mast the best he could. It didn't take long for Luffy to remove the paint and dirt from his fight with Laboon, and soon he was back outside, spick and span. "Huh, where'd those guys go?" Zoro asked, realizing that Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine were no longer unconscious on their deck. "Those guys? Who knows? I do wonder who they were though," Nami said as she looked down from the upper deck's railing. Walking forward, Luffy saw a log pose on the deck and picked it up. "What's that, Luffy?" she asked, seeing him pick the object up but not knowing what it was. "It's a, log pose thingy I think," Luffy told her after a second of thinking. He wasn't a navigator so he wasn't actually all that sure on what the object was. He remembered back to the few times everyone back on Whitebeard's ship had tried to teach him basic navigation, remembering that someone had called this a log pose. "A log pose thingy?" she asked, walking down the stairs and over to Luffy to get a better look. "Yeah, the navigators on Pop's ship used them. I don't know how to though," he said, handing it over to her. She examined it for a minute before wrapping it around her wrist. "Well, it looks like a compass at least. It's different than what I'm used to, but I'm sure I can get a hang of it no problem," she told him confidently. Feeling this, Luffy smiled and nodded. "Hey, Luffy, come help me with this. // // As everyone went about their normal routine, Nami left the Mary to sit at a table and chairs outside of the lighthouse, compass, and map spread out in front of her. Sanji was finishing making lunch while Usopp finished his patchwork job of getting the Mary's mast standing again. Zoro napped, per usual, and Luffy lounged around, watching Laboon as he thrashed around in the water again. "What's the matter? Quiet down," Luffy called to the whale, wondering what had him so worked up all of a sudden. "What's the matter, Nami-san? If it's food you're worried about, it's ready." Sanji cooed as he headed her way, large platters of food in his hands. Nami looked up from her rapidly spinning compass, perplexed. "Oh, mealtime?" Usopp asked, climbing up the rope ladder to join the two on the cliff. "The compass is broken. It doesn't point in any direction," she told them. Luffy, having joined them after hearing mealtime, looked to see the needle spinning uselessly in circles. "Ah, you're right. It's spinning," Usopp noted, also crowding around the table to look. "Whoa, that's cool," Sanji said in amazement, joining them. "That's it. That's what the log thingy was for," Luffy said, remembering now exactly what it was for. "Log thingy?" Usopp and Sanji asked in confusion. "This?" Nami asked, lifting her wrist to look at the log pose again. Luffy nodded, all of them seeing the needle inside the glass remaining unmoving, unlike their compass. "Yeah, Pops and everyone said normal compasses won't work and they showed me one. It was spinning just like that. They said you have to use log poses instead," he explained, remembering how cool it had been to see the spinning needle on their compass. "Seems you came with at least some knowledge of the Grand Line after all," Crocus said as he left the lighthouse, joining them. Forgetting about the navigation stuff, Luffy turned his sights on the food which irritated Sanji. Crocus, can you explain this to me? Teaching isn't really Luffy's strong suit. Nami said dryly, sticking out a thumb to the rubber man who was still eyeing the food hungrily. As I said before, common sense is useless in the Grand Line. The compass isn't broken, he told her. Then could it be that the magnetic fields are? Nami trailed off, but Crocus knew what she was going to say. He went on to explain to them exactly how the Grand Line worked and how they needed log poses rather than compasses to get around. Nami listened intently, needing to know this information if she was going to guide them through this sea. He explained how they worked as well, showing Nami on the log pose itself what to look for and what it would do. He finished by telling them that no matter which path they started with, all of them would lead to the same endpoint. Raftel, then the One Piece is there? Usopp asked excitedly. Who knows? That's the most prominent theory, but no one has been able to reach there. Crocus told him. Luffy, who was now down to just the bones of the fish he was eating, grinned. We'll know once we get there. He said confidently, no doubt in his mind that he would reach the legendary island. Say, boy, how is it you know so much about the Grand Line anyhow? I heard you call it paradise earlier as well. You wouldn't happen to have sailed these waters before, have you? Crocus asked Luffy with a raised eyebrow. Me? Yeah, I was a part of Whitebeard's crew for a while. I'm starting my own crew now though. Luffy explained with a smile. Is that so? Ah, now it makes sense, you're 11,097, right? He asked, recognizing Luffy's face now. Luffy hummed, waiting to see how Crocus would respond to that. Around him, Nami, Usopp, and Sanji listened silently. I heard about you and all the other kids escaped. Good job, Crocus said, surprising Luffy. Of all the things he had expected to hear, that had not been one of them. Huh? Luffy asked, confused. The others were confused as well because when they'd heard about Luffy being an escapee, their first thoughts had not been along the lines of Crocus. You were in a facility, right? Crocus asked, smile gone as he spoke. Luffy stiffened at his words, bristling in preparation to get out of there fast. His crew saw the turn in Luffy's demeanor, the sudden frown, the tense posture, and they wondered once again what the facility was. What do you know about facilities? Luffy asked, his voice low and dangerous. His fingers were digging into the rocky ground beneath him at the many scenarios his mind was coming up with. Crocus had said earlier that he was a doctor. What if he was a facility doctor after all? It wasn't too far-fetched a thought seeing as the man seemingly knew what facilities were. Not only that, but Sabo had just told him about Haru possibly being in paradise as well, so he was on high alert to anyone who could have any connection to facilities. Not much in all honesty. The crew I sailed with stumbled upon one a long time ago. Despicable things, facilities, Crocus said, face twisting in disgust at the last part. This calmed Luffy slightly, feeling the truth in his words as he spoke. So you're not a doctor then? Luffy asked, just in case. Even though it was all but confirmed for him, he still needed to know, to feel the truth in Crocus' words before he would be able to relax. A ship's doctor, yes. A facility doctor, never, Crocus told him honestly. Luffy stayed silent a minute, digging through Crocus' every emotion for even a hint of a lie. Finding none, he finally let himself relax, fists unclenching. Nami, Usopp, and Sanji could only watch on, their confusion as clear on their faces as it was to Luffy's abilities as they listened. They were completely lost as to what the two were talking about seeing as all they'd ever gotten out of Luffy about facilities was that they were bad places, but the fact that Crocus seemed to be confirming that sentiment as well made them even more curious as to what happened in these facilities. Good. You're a good guy, old man. It would have sucked if I had to fight you. Luffy said honestly. His posture was much more relaxed now, finding Crocus to not be a threat like he first thought. Crocus laughed at his words, clearly not offended by them. Anyway, now that I'm done eating, should we go? Luffy asked, his seriousness gone as he lounged back. With this new turn in conversation though, Sanji finally noticed the empty platters of what used to be food on the table. Did you eat this all by yourself? Sanji shouted in a mixture of astonishment and anger. Whoa, even the bones are gone. Usopp said, looking at the empty platters with wide eyes, also having been too preoccupied with the conversation to notice Luffy eating it all. Now that we have this log pose, we should be good to go. We have to take good care of this if we want to continue our journey. Nami said as she looked at the log pose on her wrist. I wanted Nami-san to eat more. Sanji roared, kicking Luffy in the stomach, sending him flying past Nami. As he flew by, however, his hand hit the glass log pose, shattering it. There was a moment as Nami froze, staring despondently at the broken log pose, while Luffy and Sanji continued talking. Sanji-kun. Yes, Nami-san, Sanji asked, clearly not hearing the warning in Nami's tone as he turned to smile at her. Both of you go cool your heads off. She yelled, kicking both Luffy and Sanji off the cliff and into the water. Sanji allowed himself to fall in the water, hearts in his eyes, while Luffy scrabbled to swim to the top. As usual, his strength was slowly being sapped away by the ocean, but he managed to stay afloat long enough for Laboon to push both him and Sanji, as well as two other people out of the water. Don't worry, I'll give you mine. I wanted to thank you for what you did for Laboon. Crocus said good-naturedly, not paying the washed-up group of four any mind. As Sanji stood up from the ground, he noticed the other two that had been fished out with them. Or, rather, he noticed one of the two that had been fished out. Here, take my hand, honey. Stepping over to where the woman was laying, he bent down onto one knee and offered his hand with a flourish, smiling widely. Oh, thank you. The woman, Miss Wednesday, said, taking his extended hand and allowing him to help her up. Without missing a beat, Sanji placed a hand on her back, leading her away from Luffy and Mr. Nine who were still on the ground. Lovely day, isn't it? He asked, attention focused solely on the woman. Hey, we have a favor to ask. Mr. Nine piped up, sitting up as well. Annoyed at being interrupted, Sanji looked to Mr. Nine in confusion, wondering what this favor was. The chef looked over to Luffy, who was still laying down, wondering what he would say to that. Earlier his captain had knocked the two out, one of his reasonings being that Mr. Nine had bad feelings, so he was curious as to whether Luffy would hear them out or not. Luffy seemed to be contemplating this as well as he finally sat up, eyeing Mr. Nine carefully. Crocus, Nami, and Usopp watched from where they stood near the tables, also waiting for Luffy's decision. For a second it seemed the teen would ignore them completely when he stood and walked over to the table, but when he reached it he sat down, looking to Mr. Nine. What is it? He asked. Unlike when he talked to his crew or Crocus, Luffy's voice held no amusement or joy. It wasn't unkind, but it also wasn't inviting either. Taking notice of the tone, Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday hesitated momentarily, but ultimately decided to continue on with asking. Sanji joined Luffy and the others at the table, interested in what this favor could be, while Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday bowed in front of Luffy, practically begging him to take them to Whiskey Peak as their favor seeing as they no longer had their log pose. Whiskey Peak. That's a weird name, Luffy said, his tone no longer as dry as it had been before. What's that? Usopp asked, eyeing the two warily. He still wasn't over the fact that they had tried to kill Laboon. Multiple times. That's where we live, sir. Mr. Nine said, tacking on the formality at the last second. What's happened to your own ship? Nami asked, also not happy with the two. It's busted, Mr. Nine answered. Hearing this, Nami leaned closer to the man, the grin on her face not matching the anger in her eyes. Isn't that asking too much, Mr. Nine, after trying to kill the whale? She asked. Mr. Nine, visibly sweating, didn't respond to that. So what are you guys? Usopp asked next. I'm a king, Mr. Nine answered, no hesitation in his voice or on his face as he said this. Though he was wearing a large crown on his head, Luffy could feel that the man was lying. The only reason Luffy was still listening was because of the fact that, despite Mr. Nine having had bad feelings earlier, he had none now. That and Miss Wednesday's aura didn't match the attitude she was giving off. Liar, Nami growled, pulling Mr. Nine's cheek in retaliation. When she let go, both Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine bowed their heads again. Disclaimer: this story do not belong to me. The author is, this Captain Wears read by OPWonders. I'm sorry, we can't say. But we want to go back to the town. We don't want to be secretive either, but... Mr. Nine trailed off. Beside him, Miss Wednesday raised her head to speak. The motto of our company is, mystery, after all. She told them. We can't just tell you anything about us. Placing confidence in your character, we're begging you. We will definitely return the favor. Mr. Nine pleaded. As he said this, despite the worry and fear in the man, there was a spark of truth to his words, as well as a spark of deception. This didn't sit well with Luffy, knowing that behind that deception was the darkness he'd felt earlier, but still, he was curious. Don't do it. No matter what they say, they're dishonest people. Crocus said as a warning. Luffy didn't need Crocus to tell him that, already knowing it from the feelings Mr. Nine was giving off. By the way, we don't have a log pose because we broke it. Do you still want to ride with us? Nami asked, lifting her wrist to show them the broken pose. What? You broke it? That's mine, you know. Mr. Nine shouted as he stood in a mixture of anger and fear, tears in his eyes. Miss Wednesday, in a very similar state behind him, stood as well. How dare you act stuck up just because we're being humble? You guys can't go anywhere either. She shouted. Nami, pleased with herself, smiled and pointed a thumb at Crocus. Oh, but actually, we have one that Crocus-san gave us. She said slyly. Hearing her words, Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine blanched, wilting back to the ground and bowing their heads again. We beg you people of such character. They said simultaneously. Even though the two of them looked to be begging and pleading, Luffy could feel the animosity in Mr. Nine towards Nami after her trick. It made him frown momentarily, but then his eyes drifted over to Miss Wednesday again. Looking at her aura one more time, he saw the bright blue contrasting brightly against Mr. Nine's darker blue. You can ride with us. Luffy finally said. What? Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine asked, sitting up in surprise. It was clear they hadn't expected him to agree. Did you say Whiskey Peak? Let's go there, Luffy said. He didn't need to see everyone's faces to know they were surprised by his answer. What? Nami asked, she and Usopp looking just as shocked as Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine. Are you serious? We're troubling ourselves to take these shady people. Usopp asked in a mixture of worry and shock. Don't worry about it, I can handle them, Luffy said confidently, looking at Mr. Nine as he said this. The man seemed to pick up on the sudden eye contact and gulped nervously but didn't say anything. But you can only choose the route here, the starting point. Crocus reminded him, though not objecting his decision. If we don't like it, then we can go around one more time, Luffy told the old man, smiling. I see, Crocus said with a smile of his own. With the decision made, Luffy stood up, excited for future adventures. Now, shall we get going? He asked, walking over to the cliff where Laboon was waiting. I've made a promise with Laboon, so it's time we get ready to set sail, Luffy said, stretching his arms as he spoke. Behind him, Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine stood, a little skeptical now of Luffy's acceptance. Who on earth are you? Miss Wednesday asked. Amused by her question, Luffy turned to grin at her. Me, I'm the man who will be king of the pirates, Monkey D. Luffy. There was a brief moment of amusement in the two as they heard Luffy's dream, but that quickly vanished when they heard his name. Wait a second, Mr. Nine mumbled, eyes going wide. Monkey D. Miss Wednesday murmured, you mean you're 11,097? They asked in unison, recognizing Luffy now. As many did when they realized who Luffy was, the two were quick to fill with fear and nervousness. Luffy did his best to ignore this though, laughing instead. Shishishi, yup. Slash backslash 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 slash backslash. It should be okay now. The log must have been stored. Is it pointing in the same direction as the map? Crocus asked Nami. The navigator looked between the new log pose on her wrist and the map she had. Yup, it's pointing at Whiskey Peak, she confirmed as the sun began to set in the distance. The Straw Hats had gotten ready to leave as quickly as possible, forcing Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday to help as well now that the crew would be helping them out. They were finally ready to go now, everyone on the merry while Crocus and Laboon watched. See ya, Flower Pops. Thanks for the log pose. Luffy called, waving happily to Crocus. Yeah, have a safe trip, Crocus called back. See ya, Whale. I'm leaving now, Luffy then said to Laboon, taking in the mark still painted on the whale's scars. Laboon let out a low, quiet noise and a goodbye of his own, making Luffy laugh. To Whiskey Peak, full speed ahead, Luffy called out to everyone. Yeah, with that, the Mary was sent sailing across the waters, leaving behind Reverse Mountain. According to Nami and their two traveling companions, Whiskey Peak was only a day away at best. In other words, no more adventuring until tomorrow. This bummed Luffy out, but it didn't stay that way for long as Luffy looked at the wide expanse of ocean ahead of them. As always, the ocean was a good calming agent for the hyperactive teen. He could stare at it for hours. Luffy hadn't been watching the ocean for long when a chill was in the air, and suddenly, it was snowing. This overjoyed Luffy as he immediately began running around Mary's deck, laughing and basking in the falling snowflakes. When enough time passed that the deck was covered in the white snow, Luffy and Usopp had quickly divulged into a snowman building contest. Alright, done, Luffy announced, standing beside his snowman. Its eyes weren't uneven and it had mop handles for arms and nose as well as a green cape and a barrel on its head. This is the man that fell from the sky, Barrel. Luffy said happily, patting the snowman. In front of him, Usopp laughed, his confidence oozing. That's such a crude snowman. He laughed. What? Luffy asked, only to see Usopp's snow sculpture. Behold, look at my soulful artwork, the Snow Queen. Usopp announced, gesturing to his sculpture. It was a woman that shared a striking resemblance to Kaya sitting on a chair of snow. Amazed by it, Luffy's jaw dropped. Whoa, that's incredible, he yelled before getting an idea. Okay then, Snow Barrel Punch, Luffy yelled, punching the back of his snowman's arms, sending the wooden pole shooting out towards Usopp's snow sculpture. The stick managed to take off the sculpture's entire head effortlessly, surprising Usopp. What the hell are you doing? He yelled, kicking down Luffy's snowman in retaliation, covering the teen in the snow. Ah, Barrel, Luffy cried angrily, immediately launching himself into Usopp. Snowman creating quickly turned into a snow battle as they pelted snowballs, rolled giant snow boulders into each other, and altogether just fought. It was all in good fun though, neither of them actually angry with each other. As the battle continued, the sun darkened with storm clouds and lightning began striking around them, the snow blowing around them harshly. Luffy was completely used to the random changes in the weather and paid it no mind, and seeing as Usopp was too caught up in the battle they were having he didn't notice it either. What stopped their fight though was Nami's sudden shriek. What? Usopp asked, looking over to the kitchen where the Nami had just come from. What's the matter? Luffy asked her, confused. From the Mary's front upper deck, Sanji looked over the railing in concern, having been shoveling snow up there. What's the matter Nami-san? He asked, worried for the woman. Ah, no way. Turn the ship around 180 degrees. Hurry, Nami ordered as she looked at the log pose on her wrist. 180 degrees. Why are we going back? Usopp asked. Did you forget something? Luffy wondered, but had a feeling that wasn't the problem based on Nami's emotions. The ship has turned around and is going in the opposite direction. When I looked away from the log pose for a second, the waves were calm earlier. Nami said, her confusion clear as day, the strongest emotion she was feeling. Oh yeah, that happens all the time. Paradise and the New World always changes weather like this. Pops had navigators always checking the log pose. Luffy told her with a laugh.
Yo, quick pause, smash that like button, hit subscribe if you're new here, share this video, and tell me in the comments which part you're loving the most.
And you didn't tell me this sooner. Nami shrieked, turning her anger towards him. Ah, I thought you knew that. Whoops, he said sheepishly now, rubbing the back of his head. Are you really a navigator? Miss Wednesday's voice asked from inside the kitchen where she and Mr. Nine were sitting, wrapped in blankets. Stop pestering me in those cozy blankets and go help already. Nami continued yelling, literally kicking the two out of the kitchen and into the snow. With the two out of the kitchen, Nami started barking orders to everyone else, telling them what to do to get them heading back in the right direction. Usopp and Sanji were running around the deck following orders while even Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday were forced to help. At one point, the skies cleared completely and a warm breeze blew past, Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine calling it the first spring's gales, which only further annoyed Nami. Zoro, who had been napping the entire time, had yet to move. Snow was accumulating on his body, but now that the weather was nicer it began to melt away. The weather continued its rapid change from calm waters and sunny skies to dark clouds and windstorms. At one point the Mary barely scraped by an iceberg, but managed to leave without too much damage. However, there was a hole that Usopp had to go patch up. When the weather was finally calm enough that the crew didn't need to frantically run around anymore, they all collapsed to the ground in exhaustion. Hey, no matter how nice the weather is, you guys shouldn't be so lazy. We'd better be on the right track. Hearing Zoro's words, Luffy could feel everyone's anger rise, but no one had the energy to do anything about it. Why are you guys still on the ship? Zoro asked. Seeing as he'd literally been sleeping since they were at Reverse Mountain, he had no idea about their agreement to take Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine to Whiskey Peak. You're slow. Mr. Nine shouted. Luffy, the only one not on the ground in exhaustion, smiled to Zoro from where he sat on the railing of the upper deck. We're heading to their town right now. It's called Whiskey Peak, he said. Being on Whitebeard's ship for so much time meant Luffy was used to the physical labor it took to handle a ship. Even though it had been chaotic for a while, it wasn't anything as bad as the New World could be, so Luffy was still ready to go. You mean we're taking them back? We don't owe them anything. Zoro said, confused as to why they would be helping the two. Right, we don't. Luffy agreed without hesitation. Well, it's not like it matters to me. Zoro said, kneeling down in front of the two. Yeah, your faces say that you're thinking bad thoughts. What were your names again? Zoro asked. Luffy was impressed that Zoro could tell from just their looks that the two weren't being entirely truthful with them. Luffy himself could feel it, as well as the small pit of darkness that had been growing inside Mr. Nine after Nami had ordered him around so much, but he knew Zoro didn't have that ability. I'm Mr. Nine. Mr. Nine said hesitantly, sweating nervously at Zoro's intense stare. I'm Miss Wednesday. Miss Wednesday answered, equally as nervous. Right, something has been bothering me ever since I first heard your names. I feel like I've heard them somewhere before, or maybe not. Zoro said, holding his chin as he continued grinning at the two who were growing increasingly nervous and fearful under the man's gaze. Luffy felt that Zoro wasn't lying, that he recognized the names somehow, but the green-haired man couldn't quite figure it out. Luffy did know, however, that the more he talked about knowing them, the more worried and scared Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine became. Maybe it had to do with that whole mystery motto that they had. Well, either way, Zoro was cut off from his sentence when Nami walked up behind him, anger radiating off of her so strong Luffy nearly fell off the railing at its intensity. She didn't hesitate to hit Zoro in the head, knocking him forward onto the deck before he righted himself. How dare you sleep comfortably all this time? You kept sleeping no matter how many times we tried to wake you up. Nami growled out. In response to both the woman's anger and the hit, Zoro himself started to become angry as well. He didn't have a chance to say any more than that as Nami began hitting him multiple times in the head, leaving bumps from how hard she hit. Don't let your guard down, everyone. We don't know what else might happen. I was finally able to realize the danger of this sea just now. There's no doubt about it seeing as my navigation skills didn't work at all. Nami said. Luffy, who had been focusing on not letting Nami's intense anger influence him, finally calmed at her words, feeling the navigator's emotions calm with his. How blunt? Are we gonna be okay? Usopp asked, sweat dropping at Nami's words. We'll be fine. Things will work out for sure. Nami said confidently, smile on her face and hands on her hips. I put my full faith in your skills, Nami-san. Sanji said, hearts in his eyes as he talked to the redhead. With that out of the way and the sky getting darker by the second, Sanji announced that dinner was ready, having been working on it intermittently during the hectic weather when he could. Luffy cheered at the thought of food, bolting to the kitchen at once while the others lagged behind. Dinner wasn't as chaotic as Luffy was used to seeing as they had such a small group of people, but it was still animated. Luffy didn't hesitate to nab food off of his crew's unsuspecting plates, only taking a small bit. And then a small bit more. And more. And a little. Oi, Luffy, quit it. Usopp chastised, hugging his plate defensively to try and keep Luffy from grabbing any more off of it. Luffy didn't say anything, merely laughing as he changed his target to Zoro, who wasn't paying him any attention. The crew quickly learned how to defend their plates from the glutton that night. When dinner was over, they left the kitchen to see that night had fallen, the moon high in the sky and lighting the deck up for them. It was determined that Usopp was taking the first watch that night and Miss Wednesday would stay with Nami while Mr. Nine would stay in the boys' room. Nami was hesitant, rightfully so, to be sleeping in the same room as someone who clearly didn't mean them well, but Luffy promised her that he would know if the woman was going to do something and he would come stop her before she could. Although still not entirely convinced that Luffy would just, no, she did give in to the request. After all, she wasn't as much of a monster to leave the girl out on the deck in the cold. Unless she tried something, then Miss Wednesday could sleep in the ocean for all she cared. With sleeping arrangements and watch duty set, everyone split up for the night, with the men, sans Usopp, heading to their room and Nami and Miss Wednesday heading to the women's room. After having such a hectic day, the crew was exhausted. From Loungetown to Reverse Mountain and now journeying through the Grand Line, had been a lot of work for them. Luffy wasn't any more tired than usual, but even he was ready to lay down and go to sleep, excited for the adventure to come tomorrow. However, when he laid down in his hammock, he found sleep hard to come by. Without the distraction of running a crew and helping sail a ship, Luffy was left with only his thoughts to pester him. He remembered how nice the day had started, and then he remembered Sabo coming to talk to him. It felt as if that talk had happened days ago already after everything that had happened afterward, but the words still held the same impact that they had when he'd heard Sabo say them for the first time. Haru was alive. Not only that, but he was most likely in paradise right now. The thought of the doctor that still haunted his dreams being on the same sea as him made Luffy frown. Quickly realizing that sleep wouldn't come easy, Luffy opened his eyes to stare at the ceiling, mind suddenly wide awake with scenarios of running into Haru again. So much for getting any sleep that night. // backslash slash 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 backslash. The next morning, Zoro woke up as groggy as ever. Wanting to go back to sleep but knowing he shouldn't, he rolled himself out of his hammock and looked around the room. Sanji was already gone, most likely in the kitchen cooking breakfast, and Mr. Nine and Usopp were both nowhere to be seen as well. For a while before falling asleep, Zoro had attempted trying to figure out where he'd heard their two new companions' names, but no matter how much he racked his brain for it, he couldn't figure it out. Deciding sleep was better than thinking, he'd given up rather quickly, and now that he was awake again, he found himself trying to remember again. Looking over to Luffy's hammock, he saw that his captain was still in it sleeping. While not entirely unusual, it was still weird for Luffy to be sleeping in longer than him. Since traveling together, Luffy was almost always up before Zoro, and ever since Usopp's arrival, the two would wake up together to go hang out outside. The teen's back was to Zoro, and he wasn't making any sounds that Zoro could hear, so the man shrugged it off, getting ready to head outside as well. The sun was bright, blinding for Zoro, who had just come from the darkroom where they slept, and it was warmer than it had been yesterday. There was no more snow on the deck and the chilling air had passed for a much more reasonable cool breeze every now and then. It was perfect weather for napping. Before he could even think of falling back asleep though, Nami came over, happy to see him awake, and asked if he could help move the rudder. Apparently, the Mary was starting to head off course again and everyone else was too busy to help. Having nothing better to do, Zoro went to the rudder and moved in where Nami directed him to. It took some time seeing as they suddenly hit some rough waters, but eventually, the Mary was back on track and Sanji was announcing the start of breakfast. As everyone piled into the kitchen, ready to eat, it didn't take them long to notice that Luffy was still sleeping. I think that's the first time he's slept in this long, Nami said in surprise. After Zoro, she was the one to have traveled with Luffy the longest and even she knew he was always up well before mealtimes. Should we wake him up then? Usopp asked, not sure what to do in this case. Would Luffy be mad if they went and woke him up? Or mad that they let him miss breakfast? Having a good idea as to which of those two Luffy would be more mad about, Zoro stood. I'll go get him, Zoro volunteered, standing up from the table and heading to the room. No one objected to this, watching as the swordsman left the kitchen. The walk to the men's room took no time at all, and soon enough Zoro was looking at Luffy's back once more, the young captain still fast asleep in the hammock like he had been earlier. Oi, Luffy, Zoro called as he moved closer. When Luffy didn't so much as twitch at Zoro's call, the swordsman got even closer, reaching a hand out. Luffy, food's ready, Zoro said, thinking the rubber teen would jump out of bed at the words. Every time food was mentioned around Luffy, sleeping or not, he would go running. This time, he stayed still. Confused, and only slightly concerned now, Zoro grabbed Luffy's shoulder, shaking him lightly in hopes that would finally rouse him. It didn't work, however, but it did move Luffy onto his back, showing Zoro the scrunched-up look of pain and maybe even fear on his face. Concern growing a little more, Zoro tried shaking Luffy a little harder, thinking that would work. After all, Luffy hadn't proved to be much of a heavy sleeper. When shaking him harder didn't work, Zoro was about ready to resort to pushing Luffy off the hammock completely. Should he go get the others? Maybe Luffy was sick or something and that's why Zoro couldn't wake him up. Sometimes when I go to sleep I don't wake up. The memory of Luffy giving him the small tube of liquid on the way to the Goa Islands came back to Zoro's mind and he turned to look at his small pile of belongings near his hammock where he'd stashed it. Looking back to Luffy and seeing that the teen's expression had yet to change, Zoro decided it was worth a shot to use whatever that vial was on Luffy. After all, Luffy was the one to give it to him in the first place. Surely it wasn't something bad. Moving to the stash, he looked around and found the tube easily. After all, he didn't have much. Examining the vial suspiciously he couldn't see anything off about it, but that didn't mean he wasn't going to be cautious with it. If I go to sleep and don't wake up, put this under my nose, but don't put it too close or else I'll spill it when I wake up. Deciding to follow Luffy's instructions, Zoro walked back over to Luffy and uncorked the vial. Immediately, an intense smell wafted to his nose and he cringed at it. What the hell was this smelly stuff anyhow? Ignoring all the questions he had, Zoro put the vial under Luffy's nose. At first, he thought it wasn't going to do anything and have to face the fact that there was probably something wrong health-wise with his captain, but just as he was about to give up he heard Luffy groan. Remembering Luffy's words just in time, Zoro pulled the vial back right as Luffy sprung up in the hammock, his eyes wide. With his fast movement and the unevenness of the hammock, Luffy fell off of it with a dull thud as he hit the ground. Surprised that the smelly stuff had worked and also mildly concerned for Luffy still, Zoro corked the bottle back up before focusing his attention on Luffy. "You alright?" he asked, not knowing what had just happened. Luffy blinked a few times on the ground, looking dazed and confused. Eventually, the teen's eyes flitted over to Zoro and the confusion turned to recognition and understanding. "Zoro," Luffy said as if confirming that was the swordsman's name. "It's time for breakfast," Zoro decided to say. Even though he had plenty of questions, Luffy didn't look in the right mind to be answering any of them. Breakfast, right. Sitting up, Luffy ran a hand through his hair and picked up his straw hat with the other. Looking at the object for a minute, Luffy placed it on his head and stood. "Thanks, Zoro," he mumbled as he walked past the swordsman. "No problem," Zoro replied as he went to put the smelly liquid away. Luffy paused in the doorway momentarily, looking back at Zoro with a look of conflict before turning to look out the hallway again. "Don't tell the others what happened, please." Hearing the request, Zoro only nodded, confirming that he wouldn't. It was obvious Luffy didn't want anyone else knowing about whatever had happened and Zoro would make sure it stayed that way. Luffy was his captain after all, so if he didn't want the others knowing he'd make sure they didn't know. Throughout breakfast, Luffy was as animated as he always was. It was as if whatever had happened in his sleep hadn't happened in the first place. When Zoro got back to the kitchen where Luffy had beaten him, the teen was all smiles and laughs as he dismissed everyone's curiosity as to why he'd slept in so long. Zoro, as promised, didn't say anything about Luffy being stuck for lack of a better term. He merely sat at the table and ate his food like normal, letting himself be pulled into idle conversation. He didn't miss the grateful look Luffy sent him either. As the day passed in a much more peaceful way than it had yesterday, Luffy was able to sit at the front of the Mary and think. He didn't like thinking, and he didn't do it often, but it was clear that he needed to come to terms with what was happening. He hadn't expected to get stuck in his nightmare then again, he never expects it, but the fact that it happened after a restless night of worrying about Haru only told Luffy that may have played a part in it. He couldn't just pretend it hadn't happened. He'd gotten lucky today and Zoro was able to take care of it like he'd hoped, no one else even noticing that something had been wrong with Luffy other than him sleeping in. What about next time though? Sure, like always, he wasn't hiding anything from them, but he also didn't want to broadcast to his crew that he had so many problems. He was the captain, and that meant he was supposed to be strong, ready to take on anything. What kind of captain couldn't even wake up from his own nightmares though? Glancing behind him, Luffy saw a glimpse of his crew all doing their own thing. Sanji was fawning over Nami, and occasionally Miss Wednesday, having fit right into the crew like Luffy expected he would. Nami was constantly checking the log pose on her wrist to ensure they were headed the right way, and Usopp was holding a bottle of Tabasco sauce, making new pellets for his slingshot. Zoro, as usual, was napping against the railing, having kept his promise not to let the others know about Luffy's issue this morning. Finally, Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine. The two had been nervous and scared for most of the journey, which Luffy expected after their reaction to finding out he was 11,097. The closer they got to Whiskey Peak though, the calmer they got, and in Mr. Nine's case, the more darkness he grew. Like before, it wasn't a lot. It was barely enough for Luffy to feel uncomfortable by it, but it was still something. It was obvious that there was something about Whiskey Peak that was causing the darkness, but Luffy didn't know what, and wouldn't until they got there. Facing forward, Luffy made sure to continue monitoring Mr. Nine's emotions in case he tried anything. Thinking again of his nightmare last night, Luffy shivered and once again wondered what he should do. With Haru being on the same sea, Luffy was finding himself constantly on edge if he didn't have anything to preoccupy his thoughts. At this rate, he wouldn't get any sleep again tonight either. He didn't know how likely it was that he would get stuck in a nightmare 2 nights in a row, but he didn't want to wait to find out. Deciding that there was only one way to handle this, Luffy hopped off of Mary's figurehead and headed to the mini den sitting out on the barrel like it always did. No one noticed him until he was heading back towards the men's room, snail in hand. "Where are you going, Luffy?" Nami asked curiously, not having noticed the snail in his hand. No one really went back to their rooms during the day, especially not Luffy. "I'll be right back, I have to call Pops about something," Luffy told her, showing the snail he held. She blinked in surprise at that, Sanji and Usopp stopping what they were doing to look as well. "Is everything alright?" Sanji asked curiously, wondering what Luffy was calling Whitebeard about. "Don't worry, I won't take long." With that, Luffy left, climbing down the mast into the men's room. It didn't escape anyone's notice that Luffy hadn't answered Sanji's question. Once in the men's room, Luffy sighed and went over to the couch inside the room, sitting down. There was a second where he hesitated, wondering if he really should call or not. After all, he'd called plenty already and he'd only just re-entered paradise. Remembering his previous worries of not getting any sleep, Luffy pushed those thoughts away and dialed the number he knew by heart, waiting through the ringing for someone to answer. "Who's this?" Hearing the familiar question, as always, Luffy smiled. "Hi, Izo," Luffy said in lieu of his name. The snail smiled in response to his words, Izo immediately recognizing him as the others had before. "Luffy, let me guess, whiskey?" Izo asked knowingly, still smiling. Smiling sheepishly now, Luffy nodded. Luffy hummed. Izo chuckled quietly, but started walking towards the nurse. "How's everything going so far, Luffy?" Izo asked in the meantime. Luffy felt himself naturally relax at Izo's soothing voice. Of all the commanders, he and Marco had always been the two that could calm Luffy down when he was suffering from a particularly bad nightmare or memory. "It's been really fun. I've got 4 crew members now and I'm back in paradise," Luffy said, a smile stretching on his face. "Oh yeah, I take it that means you've gone past Reverse Mountain?" Izo asked knowingly. "Yeah, that was so much fun," Luffy said, laughing now at the memory of going down. "Well, running into Laboon hadn't been all that fun, but it had all worked out in the end. I had a feeling you would think that. We saw you in the newspaper by the way. Everyone's having a field day with how confused the Marines are," Izo said, laughing himself now at the thought of how wrong the Marines had been about Luffy being kicked out. Luffy laughed as well, just as amused. "Anyways, here's whiskey now. You stay safe, alright Luffy," Izo said sternly, Luffy nodding obediently to his words, smiling still. Izo said his farewells quickly before the snail was handed over to the nurse Luffy wanted to talk to. "Luffy, what's up? You haven't been poisoned again, have you?" Whiskey asked with a raised eyebrow. Shaking his head at the question, Luffy laughed quietly. "Nope, not poisoned. I got stuck last night," Luffy told her bluntly, wanting to get straight to the point with this one. They were due to reach Whiskey Peak today, and as much as Luffy wanted to talk with Whiskey for as long as possible, he knew that the second they reached the island he was going to have to end the conversation with her. "This wouldn't happen to be because of some news you heard recently, would it?" she asked knowingly. Luffy was confused, wondering how she knew about that. "Marco told me about Sabo's call, and I was there after Ace found out." "Luffy, truthfully I've known Haru was still around for a while now," Whiskey admitted, having seen Luffy's confusion over the snail. Luffy realized that that made sense but was still a little annoyed that Sabo had seemingly told everyone else but not him or Ace. "Luffy, how are you taking the news?" she asked, voice growing softer in concern. Luffy frowned at that, thinking it over. He wanted to answer honestly, and if he was going to do that he needed to take the time to really figure out how he felt about Haru being alive. "I was mad that Sabo didn't tell me sooner. And I don't like that Haru's back," Luffy said slowly as he tried to find the right words to express his emotions. "That's understandable. Anger is a natural reaction to someone withholding important information like that," Whiskey said, making Luffy feel better. After Sabo left, he'd also felt a little guilty for being so mad at his brother. Luffy understood why Sabo had kept it from them, but that understanding didn't stop him from being angry. Luffy and Whiskey continued to talk for a while, the nurse helping him work out the different emotions he was having after his revelation. Whiskey told him the fact that he knew Haru was in close proximity could be causing him stress, which could have played a factor in him getting stuck in his nightmare last night. Overall, the talk was good for Luffy as he expected. It didn't change the fact that Haru was still in paradise at the same time he was, and it didn't change the fact that Luffy was going to continue worrying about it, but talking it out with Whiskey truly made him feel better about everything. By the end of their conversation, Luffy was feeling much better than when he'd first called her. "I'm glad you took the time to call and talk to me about this, Luffy. And remember, Pops and everyone here wouldn't hesitate to come help you out with anything you needed." Whiskey reminded him. Luffy nodded at that but knew he wouldn't ask for that help unless there was no other option left. This was his journey, he didn't want to cheat by using Whitebeard's strength and power to help him out. "I know. Oh, and I promise that I'm still looking for a doctor," Luffy said, remembering Whiskey's want for him to add one to his crew. The nurse laughed at that, making Luffy smile. "I know you are. At least we all don't have to worry about the doctor you choose. If there's anyone you're going to choose carefully, it's gonna be your doctor," Whiskey said, still smiling. It was true after all because Luffy was going to be extremely picky when it came to the medical staff of his crew. Luffy knew that he needed to find a doctor of his own so he didn't have to keep calling Whiskey all the time, but he couldn't imagine finding anyone he would trust like he did Whiskey. She was the first nurse outside of the facility to show that she wanted to help Luffy and his brothers rather than hurt them. He'd told her about every thought and feeling he'd had for years now, and the thought of finding someone else to fill that role was daunting. How would he know that the doctor he found was going to be good like Whiskey? That they're blue because Luffy would never want to allow someone without a blue aura to join, especially a doctor wouldn't turn to gray, and then black, after hearing everything Luffy had to say. It was a stressful thought for Luffy, and seeing as he didn't like stressful things, he decided to ignore it for now. There was no use worrying about it now anyway, seeing as there was nothing he could do at the moment to fix it. Instead, he focused back on the call with Whiskey, nodding. I'm gonna go now, Whiskey. Thanks for talking," Luffy told the nurse, the stress melting away as Luffy pushed his previous thoughts away. "It was no problem, Luffy. Goodbye. Gacha." With the snail asleep once again and Luffy feeling much lighter and happier, the team left the men's room and headed back up onto the Mary's deck. As he did, he heard a conversation from the front of the ship where everyone was standing. Once he'd put the den back on the barrel that it usually rested on, he went to join them, catching the end of Nami's sentence. "In fact, look, our first journey is over," the woman said as she pointed ahead of them to where they could see land. Even though he hadn't heard the beginning of the conversation, Luffy didn't care as he focused on the strange-looking land. "It's a really funny-looking island," Luffy noted as he walked up behind his crew, Usopp and Nami jumping in surprise while Zoro and Sanji turned to look at him. "Luffy, you're back," Usopp said, holding his heart. It was evident they hadn't heard him coming, which made Luffy snicker. "Those cacti are huge," Luffy said instead, nodding back to the island as he said this. Everyone looked back, finding themselves agreeing with his words. The entire island was covered in gigantic cacti that dwarfed even their ship. "So this is Whiskey Peak," Sanji said, hands in his pockets as he took in the strange-looking island. Even though many were confused and mildly concerned about what Luffy had been doing, they didn't question it. The sound of Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday jumping onto the Mary's railing drew their attention away from the island once again. "Well then, we'll be leaving now," Mr. Nine started. He and Miss Wednesday crouched on the railing as they addressed the crew. "Thanks for taking us home, honeys," Miss Wednesday said next. "If we're linked by fate, we'll meet again," Mr. Nine continued. "Bye-bye, baby." Both Mr. Nine and Miss Wednesday said this before the two of them flipped backward off of the railing and into the ocean, swimming quickly to the nearby island. Luffy was honestly glad they were gone because as they spoke, Mr. Nine's darkness got worse, a feeling of knowing in the man. Miss Wednesday still didn't have the darkness, but she shared the knowing feelings of Mr. Nine, telling Luffy that they would definitely see the two again. "They're gone," Nami said, unknowing to Luffy, picking up on the two's strange feelings. "Who on earth were they?" Usopp asked from where he stood beside the navigator. "Who cares?" Zoro asked, crossing his arms over his chest as they watched the two swim. Even though the man hadn't been able to figure out where he'd heard their names before, he wasn't all that bothered by it. It obviously wasn't all that important. "We're landing," Luffy noted, turning to look at Whiskey Peak, which was now right beside the Mary. "There's a river at the front. Looks like we can go inland by ship," Nami said, focusing back on guiding the ship safely. Isn't it possible that there are monsters or things like that?" Usopp asked, his fear returning as he began shaking. "It's definitely possible. This is the Grand Line," Sanji said, seemingly unfazed by the idea that there would be monsters. "If we come across monsters, we can just fight him," Luffy chirped happily, his previous misgivings gone at the idea of a good fight. "What do you mean we?" Usopp and Nami asked frightfully before Nami remembered something. "But you're right, we would have to stay anyway for a certain period of time," she said, wilting as she said this. "Why?" Usopp asked, eyes wide at the prospect of having to stay with the possible island monsters. "Unless we store the magnetism of this island in the log pose, we can't go to the next island." Since each island requires a different amount of time to store the log, some islands require only several hours while others require days. She explained, lifting her wrist to show them the log pose. Then even when this is a monster island that we want to escape from right away. Usopp trailed off. We would have to stay here for possibly days until the log is stored, Nami confirmed, finishing the man's sentence. Shishishi. We'll just deal with it when we have to. Let's go already. Luffy laughed happily, ready to explore the island. Luffy's right. Let's go. It's not worth thinking about it. Zoro agreed, just as ready to land, though not entirely for the same reasons as the young captain. No matter what happens, I'll protect Nami-san, Sanji said, pointing to himself with a smile. Hey, wait, listen, everyone, my chronic illness is suddenly. Do not go to the island, disease is. Then we're going in, Nami said, interrupting Usopp and ignoring him completely. No, Usopp said weakly. Listen, be prepared to run, as well as fight. Nami continued, clearly focusing more on the idea of running than fighting. Well, like I said, my chronic illness is. Well, I guess you're not listening. Usopp said, trailing off as he realized everyone wasn't paying his words any mind. As the Mary sailed further inland, they were surrounded by a fog that blocked their view of the island right beside them. Luffy was undeterred by this, sitting on Mary's figurehead with a wide grin, waiting for anything to appear. The further inland they got, the more people Luffy began feeling around them. Of course, this made sense seeing as they were going through an island, presumably inhabited by people. What made it worrying was the emotions that the people around them had. We should be careful here, Luffy told the others, his eyes darting around the fog as he warned his crew. Why? What is it? I knew it, it's monsters, isn't it? Usopp asked, his shaking only getting worse as he tried seeing anything in the fog. No monsters that I can feel. Only people, but they're not nice, Luffy said, tilting his head as he took in more of the maliciousness in the air. A fight then, Zoro said, placing a hand on his swords as he inspected the fog as well. Someone's moving, Nami called out, pointing in the distance where they could just barely make out a person's shape. Usopp squeaked in fear while Sanji and Zoro tensed in preparation for a fight. Luffy didn't move yet, feeling the maliciousness in the man, yet also a deceitful happiness. Damn it, since it's come to this, I've prepared myself. Usopp said, his goggles over his eyes and slingshot in hand, legs still shaking. The fog around them began clearing, showing them that there were many people around them. What they weren't expecting were the happy smiles and cheering. Welcome to the Grand Line. Welcome to our town. To the welcoming town, Whiskey Peak. Chapter 23, Not So Welcoming Whiskey Peak. Welcome to the Grand Line. Welcome to our town. To the welcoming town, Whiskey Peak. The cheering from the town confused the battle-ready crew. All of them, minus Luffy, were looking around with skepticism. I thought you said they weren't nice. Usopp said, not seeing the angry mob he'd envisioned in the smiling town. They're pretending, Luffy said quietly, his eyes scanning over the deceptively friendly town. Despite their outward cheerfulness, Luffy could feel that they were faking it, that they had darker motives. Pretending? Sanji asked, looking over the railing at the banners and confetti that were welcoming them. It was hard to believe Luffy's words. Even though all of the crew for the most part believed Luffy wasn't lying about his abilities, it was still hard to believe that these people were just pretending. Are you sure your abilities aren't a little, I don't know, out of whack? Usopp asked skeptically. Luffy only shook his head, face still set in a frown. No, they're faking. The confidence in Luffy's voice was enough to convince the crew as they took another look at the welcoming town surrounding them. Even though it was still hard to believe, Luffy hadn't been wrong yet. Besides, it wouldn't hurt for them to be a little cautious. After all, how likely would it be for a town to welcome pirates? Pirates welcome to our town. Hooray for the heroes on the sea. Trying to remember that they might be pretending, the crew slowly sailed by the cheering. Whoa, there are a lot of cute girls. Sanji swooned, eyes turning into hearts as he leaned over the railing to get a better look. Maybe pirates are people's heroes after all, Usopp said, blowing kisses to the crowds and forgetting that they could be acting. Nami face-palmed from behind the two while Zoro only shook his head. When they finally found a spot to dock, Luffy led the crew off the Mary. His eyes scanned the crowd in front of them. Despite the bad feelings coming from each and every one of them, there were only a handful that had gray colors. For the most part, the people of the town had a dark blue aura. Welcome welcome. The crew watched as a man with giant curls in his hair walked up to them. Taking in the man's emotions, Luffy found that they were the same as the rest of the town. Despite the welcoming air and smile on his face, the man did not have good intentions for them. Unlike the rest of the town, however, this man had a lighter blue than the rest. It wasn't the lightest blue he'd ever seen, but it was much nicer to look at than the darker blues surrounding him. My name is Agarapoy. I'm the mayor of Whiskey Peak. Agarapoy greeted. Luffy felt that even the name, Agarapoy, had given him was false, the man lying about it. Looking him up and down one more time though, Luffy only nodded to him instead of calling it out. Okay, I'm Luffy. Nice to meet you, Luffy said in response, his crew standing behind him. Whiskey Peak is a town that thrives on making liquor and music. Hospitality is the pride of our town. As for our liquor, it's as bountiful as the seawater. Would you allow us to throw a party for you so that we may hear your tales of your tales of adventure? Even though Luffy could feel Usopp and Sanji's interest piqued at the idea of a party, they didn't say anything, all of them still waiting for Luffy's response. With one more glance around the town, Luffy shrugged, smiling as well. Sure, why not? At his words, Usopp and Sanji began dancing together about women and parties while Nami shook her head. By the way, how long will it take for the log of this island to be stored? Nami asked, showing Agaripoy the log pose on her wrist. Log. Forget such boring stuff. Please just rest after such a long journey. As he spoke, he went over to wrap an arm around Nami's shoulder, and despite the lightheartedness in his tone and the smile on his face, Nami couldn't help but remember Luffy saying they were acting. Because of this she felt herself stiffen at the contact, but force a smile of her own. If there was one good thing that came from Arlong's rule of terror, it was her ability to act under pressure. Now, everyone, prepare for the party. Sing to entertain the adventurers. Agaripoy announced, eliciting another round of cheering from the townspeople. Nami was reluctantly dragged along through the crowd, Usopp and Sanji following enthusiastically, leaving Luffy and Zoro watching after them. Be careful here Zoro, Luffy told his swordsman, keeping an eye on Nami to make sure Agaripoy didn't try anything. Right, but if you know they aren't nice, why'd you agree to a party? Zoro asked curiously, eyeing the crowd suspiciously as he spoke. Because of this, it took a second to notice Luffy's wide grin. Because parties are fun. With a laugh, Luffy ran off to catch up to the rest of his crew, leaving Zoro to scowl and shake his head. You really are an idiot, aren't you? Party time. The crew, as well as many townspeople that could fit, were all crammed inside the town's bar. Drinks were poured, drunk, and then poured again, people danced, people laughed, people sang. A band was playing music in the corner of the bar, just as jubilant as the crowd listening, but they were nearly overshadowed by how loud everyone else was. It was dark outside now, the party in full swing. Usopp was sitting telling stories to a large crowd of people, all of them hanging on to his every word. Although they seemed to be awed by his words, Luffy could feel that, like everything else, they were acting. Zoro and Nami were in the middle of a drinking competition, Nami demanding the swordsman join once she found out the winner would get 100,000 berry. So far, Nami was on her 12th cup while Zoro was on his 10th. Sanji was in heaven as he sat with a large group of women, trying to hit on each and every one of them at the same time. And finally, Luffy was eating all the food he could want. At one point, one of the chefs passed out, overworked at attempting to feed Luffy's bottomless pit. This didn't stop the captain though as he started nabbing pieces off of everyone else's plates. And despite the crew's antics, the townspeople merely laughed and went along with it, though their true feelings told Luffy they were still up to something. Slowly, as time went by, the crew began wearing themselves out. It started with Zoro who faceplanted on the table, then Usopp, Sanji, Nami, and finally Luffy as he fell out of his chair and onto the ground, stuffed. Many of the townspeople fell asleep as well, but Luffy knew that many were still awake. Of course, knowing that they were all up to something, he didn't let himself truly fall asleep. Thanks to the facility, even when he was sleeping he was still on alert. There had been too many times before Sabo had gotten his enhanced hearing that the brothers had been startled out of their sleep by doctors dragging them to testing. Because of this, Luffy was an incredibly light sleeper and he knew the second there was even a slight peeking in the town's malicious feelings, he would be wide awake and alert. It was a while after he'd fallen asleep that Luffy felt Zoro wake up fully. The swordsman hadn't been completely unconscious, staying on guard like Luffy was. Although there were still a lot of townspeople in the bar, Zoro managed to get up and leave the bar without any of them noticing, Luffy watching through a peaked open eye. The young captain had to hold in his laughter as he watched every person in the bar narrowly avoid seeing Zoro walking out the side door. It didn't take long for them to notice that he was gone though, a large group of them running out the door in an attempt to get Zoro back. Seeing this, Luffy decided to wake up as well. Man, that was some good food, he said, stretching as he stood up off the ground. This surprised the remaining townspeople as they spun to look at him. Why, you're awake, one of them said, trying to hide his surprise and nervousness with a smile. It failed to work on Luffy though as he could feel his true emotions. Yup, Luffy said, scanning his eyes over the rest of his crew that were still asleep. Like Zoro and Luffy however, he felt that Nami was only feigning sleep rather than actually being unconscious. Ignoring this for now, Luffy turned to look at the small group of people here, knowing he could take them down easily. Ah, well, you really should get some more rest. After all, you've had such a long hard journey reaching the Grand Line. Another said with an equally nervous smile as the last man. Paradise. Luffy corrected, confusing them. What? The man asked, his smile slipping to a look of confusion. We're in paradise. And it wasn't that hard to get here. I had fun, Luffy said honestly. The group shared a look, Luffy feeling that they were trying to figure out what they were going to do. There was a turmoil in all of them until one finally felt courageous enough, their hand moving to their side and alerting Luffy that they had some type of hidden weapon there. Regardless, we're going to have to insist that you sit back down. The man said, his smile falling into a determined look. The rest of the group backed this up by moving their hands to their sides as well, some even pulling swords out. Nah, I don't want to, Luffy said, still grinning. In that case, you asked for it. In one fluid motion, the man pulled out his gun and fired, but like always, the bullet bounced harmlessly off of Luffy's shoulder, flying off to the bar's ceiling and lodging itself there. The group in front of Luffy gaped, obviously not expecting that. He's wanted alive, one of them hissed. I aimed for the shoulder. The one that shot said. Didn't matter anyway, it flew off, I am. He really is a monster. Another said fearfully. Monster or not, he's worth too much to pass up. A fourth said, one holding a sword. After speaking, the man charged forward, intent on maiming or just injuring. The teen didn't wait to find out which it was, swaying to the right as the man attempted slicing his left arm. As quick as the man swung his sword, Luffy swung his fist down onto the man's head, knocking him out instantly. Aw shit, I didn't sign up for this, said a man from the group. We're bounty hunters, what did you think you were signing up for? The one beside him asked. Humans. I signed up for humans. That is not human. Luffy frowned at the words but tried his best not to let them affect him. He'd heard plenty like this before after all, what was one more and probably many more in the future to the list. Gum gum, that doesn't sound good. Whip. Swinging his leg out, Luffy knocked down the group of about 12, all of them crashing out of the bar's front doors. Nami, you can go get your money now, Luffy said, referring to the winnings Nami had yet to get from the mayor. The orange-haired woman rose her head, blinking at Luffy in surprise for a second. How do you know? I felt it, Luffy answered, already knowing what she was going to ask. Right, I guess I'll leave it up to you then, she said, giving him a thumbs up before further into the bar. Luffy took one more look at Usopp and Sanji who were still passed out, making sure they were still unharmed. Unlike Nami, Zoro, and Luffy, these two weren't faking their sleep. Luffy could feel that they were both deeply unconscious, their muted feelings blissfully unaware as to what was happening around them. Turning his attention away from the two, Luffy walked out the front doors where he'd kicked the group out of. Walking out, he saw the aforementioned group scrambling to their feet, and another, much larger group of townspeople as well as the mayor behind them. He's awake. The monster. 11,097. There were gasps and murmurs from the crowd as they looked at Luffy with wide eyes. It's no matter. There are about 100 of us here right now. We can take him down, the mayor said from the front. Knowing that this fight would be nothing but a warm-up, Luffy turned to look towards Zoro who was standing on the bar's roof. You remembered who they were, Luffy said more than he asked. He could feel that the turmoil of trying to remember why he knew Miss Wednesday and Mr. 9 had finally passed and instead, he was filled with recognition. That's right, they're called Baroque Works, Zoro responded, hopping down off the roof to join Luffy. You bastard, how is it that you know our company's name? Mr. 9, who Luffy hadn't realized was standing by the mayor along with Miss Wednesday, asked. Everyone was even more shocked than they had been earlier, clearly in disbelief and maybe even a little scared over the fact that Zoro knew of them. When I used to be in a similar line of work, I was recruited by your company once. Naturally, I rejected it. Employees don't know each other's identity and are called by code names. Of course, the boss's whereabouts and his identity are also a mystery, even to them. Baroque Works is a criminal group that just faithfully carries out their orders. HMPH. Was it a secret? Zoro asked with a menacing grin. Well, this is surprising. If you know our secrets, then we have no other choice but to kill you. Another gravestone will be added to the cactus rocks. Agarapoy said, Luffy feeling that he truly intended on killing them right now, blue or not. Kill them, the mayor yelled, pointing angrily in their direction. The effect was immediate as the crowd of 100 bounty hunters charged forward towards Luffy and Zoro. Both of them weren't worried in the slightest though, the two of them watching calmly as the crowd charged them. You got this? Luffy asked, already turning around and walking back towards the bar. Zoro turned to look at him in confusion for a minute before grinning and nodding. This'll be easy, Zoro said confidently, pulling out his swords as he faced the crowd again. Luffy laughed at that, nodding. I'll leave it to you then, Luffy said, just as confident as Zoro was that the swordsman would be fine. Alright, shall we? Luffy heard Zoro ask before the sounds of a fight started. As much as Luffy wanted a good fight, he also knew he should probably get Usopp and Sanji back to the Merry, lest they get caught up in the fighting while they were unconscious. Stepping in, Luffy immediately spotted his two crewmates, still just as passed out as when he'd left them. They both had smiles on their faces and drool coming from their mouths, blissfully unaware of what was happening outside. Walking over to Usopp first since he was the closest, Luffy picked him up and slung him over his left shoulder. Moving to Sanji next, he slung the man over his right before turning to leave the bar again. "Let me tell you Captain Usopp's tale number 731. Usopp said in his sleep. Beautiful women everywhere. Sanji cooed in his sleep as well. Luffy ignored the two he had in tow as he walked out of the bar, noticing that the fight had moved into the side alleys of the town and there was no one outside of the bar anymore. It made his job easier, but Luffy wouldn't lie and say he hadn't been hoping to fight someone himself. The walk back to the Mary was peaceful despite the distant sounds of gunshots in the distance. Even though he was getting farther away, Luffy could still feel Zoro's emotions, and because of that, he was keeping some attention on it to make sure Zoro didn't get into anything he couldn't handle. While he trusted that Zoro could handle everyone here, that didn't mean that the swordsman wouldn't run into any problems. As expected, Zoro was fine. There was the occasional flare of pain, but it always subsided quickly, telling Luffy it was nothing serious. When Luffy finally reached the Mary, he put Sanji and Usopp into the men's room, and once they were safe he went back to join Zoro. It was at this point that there was a flare of pain in Zoro that didn't subside as easily as all the other flares. It wasn't anything serious, but it told Luffy that someone had gotten a semi-decent hit on the swordsman. By the time Luffy was walking over to where Zoro was at, he saw that Agarapoy, Miss Wednesday, and Mr. Nine were standing amongst tens of bounty hunters that Zoro had taken down, only a handful still standing. Zoro was standing on the roof of a nearby home, his forehead bleeding and a body at his feet. "It seems it's finally our turn to fight," Miss Wednesday said in determination. "You may know this, but in Baroque works, the smaller the number, the higher his level and destructive power are. The three of us, Mr. 9, Mr. 8, and Miss Wednesday, are agents with a single-digit number, which means we're powerful people who are beyond comparison to those you just beat," Mr. 9 said, raising a pinky in the air as he grinned devilishly, clearly thinking he was going to scare Zoro with his words. "Zoro could take you all," Luffy said as he continued to casually walk up to the group. It was obvious that the members of Baroque Works had forgotten about him, all of them spinning around with wide eyes. 11,097, Mr. 9 squeaked, his previous confidence gone at the sight of Luffy. "You're back," Zoro said in lieu of a greeting. "Yeah, Usopp and Sanji are still sleeping. Nami's somewhere over there," Luffy said, gesturing vaguely in the direction he could both smell and sense the navigator. Turning his attention back to the three Baroque Works agents and the small handful of bounty hunters, Luffy grinned. "Want help?" he asked, already knowing what Zoro's answer would be. "No, I got this, Captain." Smile widening at Zoro's predictable answer, Luffy sat down against one of the buildings. "I'm gonna take a nap then," Luffy said with a yawn. It was late in the night, the moon high in the sky now. He hadn't gotten much sleep earlier, so it would be nice to rest a while longer while he could. "Don't underestimate us," the Baroque Works agents screeched. Luffy ignored them though, even when Agarapoy pulled out what looked to be an instrument but turned out to be a gun. Before the man could attempt to use it on Luffy, Zoro came down from the rooftop and stopped him, drawing the agent's attention to him. "You're fighting me right now. Let's see how good you guys really are. // backslash slash 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 backslash." The feeling of someone using his stomach as a bounce pad woke Luffy up. Blinking and looking around in confusion, the young captain tried to figure out where he was and what was happening. It didn't take long for him to remember though, as a cry from above showed Zoro slicing Agarapoy across the chest, defeating the mayor of the town. As the man fell, Luffy noticed that the rest of Baroque Works were down as well, Zoro having successfully beaten them all. Standing up and stretching, Luffy grabbed onto the roof that Zoro was now sitting on, joining his swordsman up there as the man pulled out a bottle of alcohol. "Nice work, Zoro," Luffy complimented, sitting beside the man. "Thanks. So are we leaving now?" the swordsman asked as he took a swig of his drink. Luffy shrugged, leaning back on his hands and looking at the sky. "I don't know. Nami said before that we had to wait for the log to set, right?" Luffy asked. "Ah, right, I forgot about that. Well, at least there's plenty of alcohol still around," Zoro said as he continued drinking. Luffy started to laugh at that when he felt two new people arrive, stronger than Mr. 9, Mr. 8, and Miss Wednesday had been. Seeing the shift in Luffy's posture, Zoro looked off towards where his captain was looking. "What's up?" he asked, wanting to know what Luffy was feeling that he couldn't. "Two more people just got here. They're stronger than the guys you just fought," Luffy said, turning to look forward again, clearly not worried by them. Seeing this, Zoro decided he wouldn't worry about it either, finishing off his drink instead. It was only quiet for another second when an explosion sounded to their right, a flash of light signaling that something blew up. "Nami's here," Luffy told Zoro, motioning down the street where the navigator was sneaking around. "Oh, good, we can leave then," Zoro said, moving to stand. Before he could though, Luffy grabbed his wrist, pulling him back down. "Hey, what are you doing?" He asked in confusion, only barely noticing the two new people walking along the road beside the building they were on top of. Nami was able to sidle up against the other side of the building to keep from being seen, which is why Luffy hadn't stopped or grabbed her. Whoever these two new people were, they were the ones that had just arrived, the stronger ones. They were full of malice and determination, their auras a dark gray that Luffy hadn't seen from anyone else on the island thus far. "They're not good people," Luffy said quietly to Zoro. The swordsman frowned but remained silent at that. Zoro, Luffy, and Nami all watching as the two new arrivals walked over to where Mr. 9, Mr. 8, and Miss Wednesday were sitting after Zoro had defeated them. There was also a duck there as well, but Luffy had no idea where it had come from seeing as he'd been asleep. The three Straw Hats remained silent, listening as the Baroque agents spoke to each other. They found out the two new arrivals were Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine, two agents higher up than the three Zoro had taken down already, which explained why they were stronger. At first, it seemed that Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine were here to help the other agents with taking down Zoro, Luffy, and the rest of the crew, but it was quickly evident that that wasn't the case. They started talking about how someone found out the boss's secrets, whatever they were, and that they were there to take them down now. They started to explain that the two that had done this were from the Alabastan Kingdom, somewhere Luffy had never heard of before, but before they could reveal just who it was, Agarapoi stood, guns coming from the giant rolls in his hair and firing. Die. Agarapapa. There was a loud explosion as all of the guns fired at once, kicking up a dust cloud. "I won't let you lay a finger on our princess. On my name as squad captain of Alabasta Kingdom Security." The man yelled, holding his arms out at his sides to block Miss Wednesday from any harm. "Agaram." Miss Wednesday yelled, eyes wide. "I thought his name was Igarama Igarapa Ipa Agarapoi," Luffy said, struggling to get the name right. He was obviously lying, Zoro said, reminding Luffy that he had known that from the beginning. "Oh, yeah, right," the captain said, turning his attention back to the group below them. "Agaram, the squad captain of Alabasta Kingdom Security. And it's Princess Nefertari Vivi. In the name of Baroque Works, boss, we'll eliminate you too." Mr. 5 said, holding up a picture of Miss Wednesday, now revealed to be named Vivi. The dust cleared, showing that the two were completely unaffected by the blast, but Agaram didn't stop, instead firing off more rounds in a vain attempt at stopping what was to come. It seemed that this was all Agaram could do though as he fell forward, exhausted after his fight with Zoro and now this. "Agaram," Vivi called out in worry, rushing to the man's side. "It's no use," Miss Valentine called out from high up in the air, her umbrella open above her. Then, she was plummeting down fast towards Vivi, kicking out her leg towards the woman. Vivi was able to dodge, but her metal hairband holding her hair up was broken, showing the strength behind Miss Valentine's kick. Despite being at a clear disadvantage and already tired as well like Agaram, Vivi still attempted to fight back, hooking a ring on her finger that had a sharp disc on the end of a wire that looked like a peacock feather. Spinning it rapidly, she swung it out towards Miss Valentine, but the woman dodged effortlessly, floating back to Mr. 5's side. "You monsters," Vivi yelled at the two agents, clearly distressed. "Vivi, you're a princess," Mr. 9 asked from the ground, still in shock over that detail. "This isn't time for joking, Mr. 9. Vivi yelled, turning her distress towards the man. "Vivi-sama, never mind me. Just please, escape from here. For our motherland," Agaram said desperately from the ground, not able to look back towards Vivi. "Without you, our kingdom of Alabasta will be. Please, hurry." Agaram continued to plead. Vivi didn't even have any time to decide what she wanted to do when Mr. 5 started digging up his nose. "You think you can escape from us?" he asked, Luffy feeling that he was getting ready to attack, but not knowing what to expect. "Don't mess with me," Vivi roared, forgetting her worry momentarily as she pulled out a second ring that she put on her other hand's pinky, spinning the two discs simultaneously. Before anyone could make a move to attack though, Mr. 9 stood up in front of both Agaram and Vivi, holding his bat out in front of Vivi. "I'm having a hard time swallowing what's going on here, but we've been a pair for a long time. I'll buy you some time. Get going, Miss Wednesday," Mr. 9 said, smiling at Vivi. "Mr. 9, pretty manly, wouldn't you say? Bye-bye, baby, hot-blooded bat." At that, Mr. 9 began flipping towards Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine, determined to do as he'd said and hold them off. Luffy felt himself smile at the action, remembering something he'd learned a long time ago. People with good colors could still do bad things and people with bad colors could still do good things. "Come on Zoro, it's time for us to go," Luffy said, standing from where they'd been perched and moving to where Nami was hiding, grabbing her and pulling her up with them. She yelped at the sudden feeling of being pulled, but once she realized who it was, she didn't protest any further. "What the hell? Warn me first," she yelled, still irked at the surprise. "Shishishi, sorry, but we gotta get going," Luffy told her, he and Zoro turning to look where Mr. 9 was getting closer to Mr. 5. "You're right about that. I'm not entirely sure what's going on here, but it's not something I think we should get ourselves caught up in," Nami said with a nod, getting ready to head to the Mary. She didn't have a chance to even start though when Luffy jumped off the roof, running towards Agaram and Vivi and grabbing the two under his arms. What? Vivi and Agaram asked simultaneously, the two not having expected this just as Nami hadn't expected being grabbed. Let's go, guys. Luffy called to his crewmates, laughing as he continued running down the street. What's that idiot up to now? Zoro asked in irritation. Who knows with him? Nami said, just as annoyed. Regardless, the two followed after him, ignoring the sounds of explosions coming from behind them. Sir Captain, I have a request of you, as unreasonable as that sounds. Agaram said to Luffy. The teen stopped in his laughing, looking at Agaram in confusion while Zoro yelled from behind them. You were trying to kill us earlier and now you're asking for favors. The swordsman yelled in irritation but was ignored. Huh, what is it? Luffy asked, wondering what the man wanted. Might I ask you to protect the princess in my place? Those two back there are both devil fruit users, and I have no means of fighting them alone. Please, keep her safe in my stead. Agaram began pleading again. Agaram, Vivi called over to the man. If you can safely deliver the princess to the great kingdom of Alabasta far east of here, I promise that you will be rewarded immensely. I humbly beg of you. Please, keep the princess safe. Agaram continued. Zoro and Nami were close enough behind them to hear the conversation, and at the mention of a reward, Nami sped up beside them, greed in her eyes. Is this immense reward, for real? She asked with a sly grin. I'll take up that offer. How does 1 billion berries sound? She continued with a wink. Luffy blinked at her but didn't stop her either while Vivi and Agaram gaped at her. Oh, 1 billion B. The two couldn't find their words anymore, too shocked by the demanded reward to speak. Will you promise us the 1 billion, squad captain? If you don't ask for our help, your princess probably will die. Nami pushed deviously. Vivi blanched at that while Agaram looked to be struggling with an answer. A mere soldier like me can't promise such large sums of money, he said, trying to get out of answering directly. You're not suggesting a princess is worth less than that, are you? Pay it, Nami said, smile growing larger. Now she's threatening him, Zoro said in disbelief from behind them. Hey, they're chasing us, Luffy told everyone, feeling that Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine had taken down Mr. 9 and were now coming after them. At this news, Nami's smile only seemed to grow if possible while Agaram and Vivi began squirming in fear. In that case, if you're willing to safely deliver the princess there, it would be best if you negotiate the terms with her directly. Agaram said, Vivi sending him a look of betrayal at that answer. Oh, is that so? Well then, princess, what'll it be? 1 billion for keeping you safe? Nami asked. Aye, that is. Why don't we work out the numbers after we're not in danger anymore? Vivi asked weakly. The promise of there being money for sure seemed to be enough to appease Nami as she patted Luffy on the back. In that case, I leave it up to you, Luffy, she said, still grinning widely. Right, Luffy replied, not realizing he was being used for Nami's money-making schemes. Besides, he'd already decided a while ago what he was going to do, regardless of if they were paid or not. I'm so ashamed. If only I'd been stronger, I could have protected the princess. Agaram said pitifully. Don't worry about it, he's insanely strong, Nami said, clearly not worried herself. If anything should happen to the princess to Vivi-sama, the kingdom of Alabasta will be finished. She must live, he finished darkly. Nami's smile fell at that, realizing that there was a lot more at stake here than she'd originally thought. Under Luffy's other arm, Vivi looked to the ground, sharing Agaram's feelings on the subject. Luffy wanted to ask plenty of questions about what was happening because he wasn't entirely following the conversation, but his haki warned him that they should stop running now. Listening to this, he skidded to a halt, dropping Vivi and Agaram to the ground and stopping Nami from running forward with his now free arm. Zoro was behind them, so he was able to stop himself before he ran past them, wondering what was up. Only seconds later, an explosion went off right where they would have been. Mr. 5, Vivi whispered from the ground, her eyes wide. I'm a bomb man, I can make my entire body explode. Thanks to this bomb fruit power, there is no mission I've never completed. Mr. 5 said confidently from behind them. Using my kilo fruit power, I'll bury Miss Wednesday into the ground. A voice from the sky said. They looked up to see that Miss Valentine was floating in the air, twirling her umbrella in front of her as she grinned maliciously towards them. I'm able to change my body weight at will. Right now I'm light enough to be lifted by the wind. But now, it's time to get heavy. 2 kilograms, 3 kilograms. They watched as Miss Valentine slowly began picking up speed, plummeting towards them faster and faster. 5 kilograms, 10 kilograms, 100 kilograms, 1,000 kilograms. 10,000 kilograms. Not wanting Agaram and Vivi to get crushed, Luffy looked over to Zoro, grabbing the two by the back of their shirts and tossing him in his direction. Zoro, Nami, run, Luffy called to them, wanting them to get out of the way while they could. They didn't hesitate to do just that, seeing what their future would be if they didn't. Zoro easily caught the two bodies thrown at him and ran off, Nami hot on his heels while Luffy remained motionless. He watched as Miss Valentine sped closer and closer, a manic grin on her face as she saw that Luffy was going to be an easy target. Luffy let her plummet closer and closer until she was only inches away from him, at which point he used Gear Second to move out of the way. Since he moved so fast, Miss Valentine had no time to readjust her weight or turn course to Luffy's new spot, and instead she barreled into the ground, creating a large crater around her. This didn't seem to faze the woman as she floated out of the hole, only mildly perturbed as she went back to Mr. Five's side. "So you're 11,097, otherwise known as Monkey D." "Luffy," Mr. Five said, he and Miss Valentine eyeing Luffy carefully. "Why would you want to protect the Princess of Alabasta?" he asked, glancing to where Vivi was now standing beside Zoro and Nami. "Why not? She's a good person," Luffy said matter-of-factly, looking at the dark colors around Mr. Five and Miss Valentine again, the colors contrasting Vivi's bright blue. "I guess it's really no matter. You're our enemy, one way or the other. You're in our way," Mr. Five continued. Beside him, Miss Valentine's grin grew again. "Yeah, he is," she agreed with a laugh. With that said, Mr. Five began picking his nose again, Nami cringing in disgust while Zoro and Luffy watched without expression. He didn't even say anything as he flicked the booger he picked towards Luffy. Like before, Luffy didn't move, letting what was now a bomb come hurtling his way, knowing it wouldn't affect him in the slightest. As expected, there was a loud explosion, but when the dust settled, Luffy was still standing, as unaffected as he'd predicted. "Why does everyone always use explosives?" the young captain asked with a small pout. Time and time again, he would fight enemies who always thought explosives were going to work on Luffy. While normally explosives would be extremely useful against normal people, Luffy was not a normal person and all explosives did were briefly make the air hot. Miss Valentine and Mr. Five were both surprised to see Luffy unharmed, and even though Mr. Five didn't show his surprise on his face, Luffy could still feel it in him. "I'm taking Vivi back to her home. If you want to stop me, you're going to have to be a lot stronger than that," Luffy said, already knowing who was going to win this fight. His words did nothing but rile the two up though, their anger rising. "Don't mock us. We're Baroque officer agents," Miss Valentine spat out with a glare. "Mr. Five, let's show him what we can do," she said, the bomb man nodding in agreement. The two ran forward, ready to attack Luffy, but there wasn't much they were going to be able to do against Luffy. Their two devil fruits were useless against Luffy, who was immune to both explosions as well as being crushed. Because of that, Luffy knew that this fight was going to be no fun, and so as to avoid drawing this out any longer than necessary, he waited until they were close enough before hitting the two over the head. The hit was strong enough that the two immediately fell unconscious, crumpling to the ground like Luffy expected they would. "Alright, they're out," Luffy said, turning to look at his crew, as well as their two new companions. Vivi and Agaram were staring at him with wide eyes, shocked by this show of strength, while Nami and Zoro were unfazed by it by now. "He took out two Baroque agents?" Vivi and Agaram asked incredulously. Beside them, Nami grinned mischievously again. "That's right, I told you he was insanely strong, remember? Now, about that payment. 1 billion. It's a pretty good offer if you ask me," the navigator said, both Agaram and Vivi blanching at the mention of payment. "And now hold on, before we start discussing payment, we have to worry about how you'll be leaving this island, correct?" Agaram asked, trying to steer the conversation away from money. "What are you talking about? We've got our own ship we can use," Zoro said in confusion. "While yes, you have a ship in log pose that you can follow, that doesn't stop the whole of Baroque Works that is now going to be after you," Agaram explained, sitting up the best he could. "Don't worry, I can fight 'em all," Luffy said, grabbing his bicep with a grin. "I don't doubt that, but we don't want them to know where the princess truly is. If they do, it will give them time to prepare once they see how close to Alabasta she is." The man continued. "So what are we supposed to do about that?" Zoro asked, though like Luffy, he wasn't seeing how this was a big deal. "I have a plan for that. You four stay here, I'll be right back." With that the man stood, hobbling back into town. They watched him go, the Straw Hats in confusion while Vivi watched in concern, but no one stopped him. "Now, about that payment." Nami pestered again, Vivi sighing in defeat. "I do appreciate your saving me. Thank you. And I know I mislead you before into saving me, but I can't," Vivi said, looking down in shame. "What do you mean you can't? You're a princess. 1 billion shouldn't be much," Nami said in confusion. "Do you know of the kingdom known as Alabasta?" Vivi asked, looking up at Nami with a frown. "No," Nami said, wondering what that had to do with anything. Behind her, Luffy and Zoro shared a look before shaking their heads as well, none of them knowing about the kingdom. Looking down again, Vivi's frown deepened. "It's a peaceful kingdom known as a great civilization and nation. Well, it used to be," she said, her emotions growing sadder and sadder as she spoke. "Used to be? What about now?" Nami asked in concern. Even if she'd never heard of the place herself, it was still someone's home, and to hear it wasn't doing so well made Nami concerned for the people that lived there. "It's in the middle of a civil war. For years now, signs of a revolution have begun to appear. The people revolted, and the kingdom fell into total chaos. Then, one day, I heard the name of an organization. Baroque Works. At those words, Vivi rose her head to show the rage on her face, a hatred burning inside her that nearly influenced Luffy. I learned that the populace was being manipulated by this group. But there was a tight lid on any other information than that, and there was nothing more I could do. That's when I asked Agaram, who always meddled in my business since childhood, for help. I asked him if there was a way I could infiltrate Baroque Works. Because that would let us see who was pulling the strings and what their goal was. Vivi admitted. At her words, Zoro found himself grinning, holding on to his swords at his side. You're a pretty high-spirited princess. So, did you figure out this goal of theirs? The swordsman asked curiously. Vivi nodded in confirmation. The founding of an ideal nation. Those who work for Mr. Zero are guaranteed a high standing in this new nation. The stronger you are, the lower your number, and the higher the standing you'll have. The boss says this is all to create an ideal nation, but it's an enormous lie. The true goal is to take over Alabasta Kingdom. I have to hurry back, tell everyone the truth, and stop the fighting. If I don't do something. Vivi couldn't even finish her sentence, her fists clenched so tightly in her lap that they were shaking. I see. So that's the deal. Now everything finally connects. There'd be no money during a civil war, huh? Nami asked, because even though she felt bad for the kingdom itself, she also felt bad that there wasn't a 1 billion belly reward in her future. Hey, who is pulling the strings? Luffy asked curiously, wanting to know if it was someone strong. Surely it had to be if they had such a large organization following them, but Luffy knew that it wasn't always the case that the head of something would be strong. The boss's identity? Vivi asked, eyes widening in surprise that he'd asked. Why you shouldn't ask that. She warned worriedly. You know who it is, right? Luffy continued asking in confusion, wondering what the big deal was. Vivi's fear only grew at this though, the princess waving her hands rapidly in front of herself. Don't ask me. Anything but that. Your lives will be put in danger too. Vivi said fearfully. I think I'll pass on that. After all, these guys are trying to take over an entire country. They're obviously insanely dangerous people. Nami said with a nervous laugh, sweating at the thought. Yes, they are. As strong as you people may be, you'd never stand a chance against one of the 7 warlords of the sea, Crocodile. There was a beat of silence as everyone realized what Vivi had just said, and once they did, Vivi and Nami both paled, jaws dropped and eyes wide. Who now? Nami screeched fearfully. You just said it. Zoro deadpanned, not knowing exactly how he felt about that. As they were recovering from the shock of Vivi outing the boss's identity to them, they noticed that beside them there was a vulture and sea otter staring at them. Like when Vivi spilled the beans, no one spoke as they processed what they were seeing. When the two flew off, Nami turned to Vivi, shaking her furiously, tears falling. What was that bird and sea otter? She demanded, shaking the princess harshly. I'm sorry. Vivi repeated over and over, tears falling down her face as well. Are they going to tell someone? Nami continued to demand, fearing for her life. Despite all of this though, Luffy only felt himself growing excited. Hey, a warlord. He cheered to Zoro who grinned back. Not too shabby. The swordsman said. I'm very sorry. It just slipped out. Vivi continued, still being thrown around by Nami in the background. Like that really fixes things now. Why did you have to drag us down with you? Nami barked back, all while Luffy continued laughing. Being hunted by a warlord the moment we enter the Grand Line is too much for me. Nami said, finally dropping Vivi on the ground and crying into her hands. We're lucky we can see him so soon. Zoro said to Luffy, the two still unfazed by Nami and Vivi's distress, too focused on what they knew would be a much more interesting fight than all the ones they'd had so far. I wonder what he's like. Luffy agreed. Shut up you two. Nami barked again before she began walking off in anger. It's been a short acquaintance, but I thank you for everything. She called, not turning back as she marched off down the street. Where are you going? Luffy asked in confusion. They don't know what we look like yet. I'm running away. Nami stated, only to walk up to the otter and vulture from before. The otter was scribbling something on a piece of paper, which they turned to show were 3 portraits of Nami, Luffy, and Zoro. Wow, that's so good. Nami complimented right before realizing what she was seeing. Turning around in a rage, she yelled back to the 3 who were watching. I guess this means there's nowhere to run now, huh? The navigator yelled furiously. I'm sorry. Vivi called back. She's funny. Luffy laughed. Where was she planning to run to, anyway? Zoro asked before grinning. Guess this means all 3 of us are on Baroque Works hit list now. The swordsman said, eliciting more laughter from Luffy. That's exciting, Luffy said, thinking of all the fun to come. Nami, however, was sitting on the ground, arms holding her legs tightly to her chest as a wave of depression rolled off of her. I do have 500,000 berries in savings. Vivi said in an attempt to comfort the other woman, still feeling bad that she dragged them all into this unwillingly. Fear not. It's ma. It's all right. As I said earlier, I have a plan. The group sans Nami turned to see Agaram who was now dressed in the same clothing as Vivi, his giant hair now tamed into a ponytail that matched how Vivi's had looked earlier, save for the curls at the bottom of it. In his arms he held 3 stuffed dummies with crude drawings for faces. Agaram, what are those clothes? Vivi asked, turning her attention away from Nami who was still sitting depressingly on the ground. You look hilarious in those, old guy. Luffy said, walking over to the man and getting a closer look at the strange get-up. It's idiot after idiot, Nami muttered weakly, her back still to Agaram and the rest. Vivi-sama, please listen to me carefully. Once Baroque works, intelligence network learns of something, pursuers will come after you almost immediately. On top of that, if you know the boss's secrets, you know what happens. Agaram said to the princess who listened carefully. 1,000 or so people will come after you. She answered, only causing Nami's fear to grow rapidly. Therefore, I will pretend to be you, like so, and sail straight to Alabasta with 3 dummies on board. Agaram continued while Luffy poked said dummies. These are supposed to be us. The teen asked. A decoy, huh? Zoro said, also eyeing the dummies. While the pursuers are busy with me, all of you will head to Alabasta via the normal route, Agaram said, ignoring the 2. Hold it. Who said we were gonna take the princess there? We still haven't come to an agreement, you know. Nami said weakly, standing up finally. Don't worry, we'll take her, Luffy assured, much to Nami's disliking. Crocodile is gonna come after us, you know. She screeched, holding a fist in the air as she did. Is Crocodile really that strong? Luffy asked, wondering why Nami was getting so worked up over this. Sure, the man was a warlord, and Luffy knew warlords were supposed to be strong, but how strong? He's one of the 7 warlords of the sea. He's a legally recognized pirate, and thus has no bounty on his head. However, the bounty he did have long ago was 80 million berries. Agaram told the captain, 80 million, that's 4 times Arlong's bounty. Say no, Nami demanded, the tears falling again. Will you do it? Agaram asked Luffy seriously, all of them ignoring Nami's yelling. Yeah, it sounds like fun. At Luffy's response, Nami put her head in her hand, wilting. I am ever grateful. Agaram said, Luffy feeling the man's gratitude was real. Even though Nami was still extremely opposed to this idea, she still followed when they all began heading to Agaram's ship, but that didn't mean she was happy about it in the slightest. The entire way, Luffy could feel her fear and nervousness, though she had stopped showing it as expressly as she had before. Zoro, like Luffy, was nothing but excited while Vivi and Agaram were much more subdued and tense. The mixture of emotions was strange, but Luffy tried focusing more on what was to come rather than the strange amalgamation of emotions he could feel now. When they finally reached the ship, Agaram turned to face them, Vivi walking over to him as she sensed a farewell. Now, then, Vivi, will leave from here. Agaram said, imitating Vivi's voice. That's a perfect imitation, old guy. Luffy praised. Imitation of who? Nami asked, knowing that no one in their right mind would believe that was Vivi's voice. Now then, princess, please give me the eternal pose. Agaram requested, his voice back to normal as he held his hand out for the object. With a heavy heart, Vivi did as told and pulled the pose out, handing it over. Eternal pose? Nami questioned, her fear momentarily forgotten. You've never heard of it. I suppose you could say it's a permanent version of a log pose. Whereas a log pose always leads ships to the next island, an eternal pose will never forget the magnetic energy of the island that is stored in it. Meaning it will forever point to that island alone. And this one is set to Alabasta. Agaram explained, holding up the eternal pose Vivi had given him, the word Alabasta etched in the top. You're going to use this to go to Alabasta? Vivi asked, looking up at Agaram. Vivi-sama, please take the indirect island hopping route to Alabasta. I've not taken the path myself, but it should only be 2 or 3 islands if you follow the log. As Agaram and Vivi spoke, the Straw Hats watched on silently, not interrupting the 2. Please take good care of the princess. Agaram requested, Luffy nodding his agreement. He already said he would, and he planned on upholding his word. Agaram, looking to Vivi as she spoke, the man saw that the princess looked to be holding back tears. I expect it will be a harsh journey. Be careful on your way, he said in lieu of comforting her. Iga. Vivi stopped herself, another rapid mixture of emotions flowing through her as she fought back the sadness. Instead, she put on a smile, holding out a hand that Agaram grabbed without question. You too. With that, the man boarded his ship, dummies at his side while the rest stayed back and watched. For once, the fear in Nami was gone as she watched with a smile that the rest shared. There he goes. He was a funny old guy, to the very end. Luffy said cheerfully, happy that Agaram hadn't turned out to be as bad a guy as his first impression had made him out to be. He really is reliable. Vivi agreed, turning to watch the ship sail further and further away. They were about ready to leave, the ship far in the distance, when Luffy felt a spike in darkness that made his skin crawl. Before he could warn anyone, there was a loud explosion that lit up the sky, a blast of heat blowing past them. No, Nami cried out, everyone's smiles gone as they watched Agaram's ship explode right in front of them. That's impossible. They're already after us, Vivi asked in disbelief. Luffy put his hat on his head since it had fallen off during the blast and frowned. He could feel that Agaram was still alive, but there wasn't anything they could do right now to go help him, not when there was someone with the darkness nearby, clearly ready to hurt, or even kill, if necessary. Nami, what's the log say? Zoro asked, an air of franticness rising at the new danger. We're okay. It's stored up, she called back, checking the post to be sure. Bring her with us. We're setting sail, Zoro said, referring to Vivi who was still standing motionlessly at the water's edge, watching the explosion that had yet to die down. Vivi, Vivi, Nami called, running up to the woman. Hurry, if they find us, it'll all be for nothing, Nami said, trying to reason with the princess. As she got up beside her though and saw her face, she saw that Vivi was biting her lip so hard it was starting to bleed. Even though they had to hurry, Nami couldn't help but hug the woman, trying to comfort her the best she could under the circumstances. Don't worry, we will get you there. I know they don't look like it. Nami started, feeling the tears from Vivi falling on her shoulder. Luffy, where's Sanji and Usopp? Zoro called from the distance, he and the captain running off. I brought them to the Mary. They were still sleeping. Luffy called back, let's wake them up and get ready to set sail. Zoro said, Luffy nodding in agreement. Just the 4 of them. Baroque works. Crocodile. Ha, the 7 warlords are nothing at all, Nami said with a grin despite the fact that she was sweating nervously. Even though only moments ago she had been worried for her life, Nami knew that right now they needed Vivi to trust them and go back to the Mary. With Nami's comfort, Vivi finally nodded, the 2 women turning to follow after Zoro and Luffy. The 2 guys had a head start, and because of that Nami and Vivi had to run as fast as they could to catch up. Nami, well versed in the art of running away, was faster than Vivi, which she noticed quickly. Hurry up, Vivi, she called back, the princess doing her best to catch up. Alright, Vivi called back, looking around as she ran. By now, Zoro and Luffy had reached the Mary, Zoro lifting the anchor while Luffy attempted to wake up Sanji and Usopp. They're still sleeping, Luffy called up to Zoro. Leave them then, Zoro called back, noticing that Vivi and Nami were finally catching up. I can't leave him, Vivi said to Nami who was trying to get her to board. Hey, what's the problem? Zoro asked, wondering if the 2 knew the situation they were in. She says her duck is missing, Nami called, clearly at the end of her patience. He won't come when I whistle for him, Vivi said. Zoro turned slowly to look at the duck sitting beside him, the swordsman crossing his arms over his chest. This him? He asked in a deadpan voice, the duck raising a wing in greeting. You're there. He was here even before me, Nami and Vivi yelled in irritation. Seeing that everyone was here, Vivi and Nami began climbing the rope ladder to get onto the Mary, nothing holding them back now. There's a tributary just up the river. We can use it to get out to sea a little faster, Vivi called to Nami as the navigator rushed on deck. Alright, let's go, Nami called when everything was ready. At her words, Zoro and Luffy set the sails, letting Nami handle the rest. Hey, Vivi was surprised to hear Zoro's voice, jumping as she turned to look at him. Mr. Bushido, the princess said, her duck turning to look at the swordsman as well. Just how many people are gonna be chasing us down? Zoro asked, wanting to know for the future. I don't know. There are about 2,000 people in Baroque Works, and I've heard there are several town-like bases like this one nearby, Vivi informed them. Hearing this, Nami leaned over the railing of the upper deck, worry on her face. They really might send 1,000 people? Nami asked incredulously. From the mast, Usopp and Sanji both poked their heads up, rubbing them groggily. Huh, Sanji muttered, looking around. The ship's leaving, Usopp asked, blinking in confusion. Finally awake, I see, Nami said in a bored tone, annoyed that they had managed to sleep through the whole thing. Wait, let's just stay one more night, Sanji cried, he and Usopp rushing to the railing to look at the town that was growing smaller in the distance. Yeah, Usopp shouted in agreement. This town is great, and the girls are cute, Sanji continued. There's no telling when we'll have this much fun again, Usopp added. Let's take it easy, we are pirates. Plus, it's not even morning yet. They have some nerve, they don't even know anything, Zoro muttered in annoyance. Hey, explain to them, Zoro called over to Nami who was walking over to them. When she reached them, she hit the 2 over the head to shut them up while Luffy watched on, not saying anything. Yep, I just did, Nami called back with a smile. That was fast, Zoro said, not having seen her hit them. Yeah, I left out the complicated parts. We should be able to leave the island soon, Nami said, looking around them to make sure they were headed the right way. Cool, there's fog now, Luffy called, looking around as well to see the thick blanket of fog covering them. It's almost morning, Zoro noted. Realizing they were getting close to escaping, Vivi and Karoo went to join Nami and Luffy on the upper deck, all of them watching the fog in front of them. Even though they were all distracted with watching the fog, that didn't stop Luffy from picking up on the darkness behind them. It was the same as before when Agaram's ship blew up, and because of that, Luffy was even more on edge when he turned to see who it was. Those with him noticed his sudden tension, wondering what was happening, only to see what Luffy had sensed. Sitting on their railing was a woman with black hair and a purple cowgirl hat that matched her purple outfit. Seeing that they noticed her, the woman grinned, her chin in her hands as she tapped her fingers on her cheek. "This is a nice ship," she told them calmly. Luffy already didn't like her because of the darkness he could feel in her, but looking at her closer, he could see that her aura was a black as well, though there was something off about it that he couldn't quite pinpoint. It wasn't the blackest aura he'd ever seen, but there was something about its edges that seemed wrong, something not right. Seeing as he wasn't able to figure it out at the moment, Luffy put the thought on the back burner in favor of what was happening but keeping a close eye on the new arrival all the same. "Who are you?" Zoro asked, hand moving to his swords instinctively. "Why you're..." Vivi stuttered, unable to speak clearly. Noticing this, the woman's smile widened and she tilted her head further into her hand. "I ran into Mr. 8 a short while ago, Miss Wednesday," she said, showing her teeth now as she smiled. "You killed a Garam." Vivi all but growled. Luffy didn't correct her, deciding he would do that later, and decided to address this new person himself. He wanted nothing to do with her, and if they had to fight that was fine with him, as long as she got off his ship. "Who are you? What are you doing on this ship?" Luffy asked with a dangerous look. "What are you doing here, Miss All Sunday?" Vivi asked, revealing that the woman was a part of Baroque Works. "Miss All Sunday? What number is she partner to?" Nami asked fearfully. "She's the partner of Mr. Zero, the boss." Vivi told them, her voice low and serious. "The bow crocodile," Nami screeched. She was the only one who knew the boss's identity. "We found out who he is by following her," Vivi said, turning to glare at Miss All Sunday. "More accurately, I allowed you to follow me," Miss All Sunday said, Luffy feeling that she was telling the truth. "I know that. You're also the one who told him we discovered his identity, right?" Vivi yelled, fists clenched at her sides. "That's right," Miss All Sunday confirmed. "What exactly is it you're trying to do?" Vivi demanded to know. "Good question. You were all so intent and serious that I found myself helping out." The idea of a princess trying her hardest to save her kingdom while making herself an enemy of Baroque Works. It was just so ridiculous, you see, she said, her posture and expression never changing as she spoke. "Don't mock us," Vivi screamed angrily as the crew moved at once. Sanji and Usopp, who had finally woken up from Nami's hit, both pulled out weapons. Usopp aimed his slingshot at the woman while Sanji held a gun to her head. Zoro pulled out his sword and Nami her bow staff, but Luffy didn't move, still ready for anything. He could feel the calm confidence in Miss All Sunday, telling him that she was either strong enough that she felt she could take them all easily, or she had something else up her sleeve. Whatever it was, Luffy wasn't going to do anything until he knew more, especially seeing as this woman had both bad feelings and a bad color. "Hey, Sanji, you do realize what you're doing?" Usopp asked as he pulled the sling of his slingshot back, holding it there. "No, not really. I just sensed that my beloved Miss Wednesday was in danger," Sanji admitted. For once, Miss All Sunday frowned, though was still calm about the situation she was in as she closed her eyes. "I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't point such dangerous objects at me," she said, and just as fast as everyone had pulled out their weapons, they were disarmed. Nami's bow staff was smacked out of her hands while Usopp and Sanji were flung away from her. "You don't mean..." Zoro started with wide eyes. A devil, Vivi was cut off as Zoro's sword was also knocked out of his hands despite there being no one there to do it. "A devil fruit?" the swordsman asked. "Which one? What's her power?" Vivi asked desperately, watching as Usopp and Sanji landed nearby. "Ow. Upon closer look, you're actually a beautiful lady," Sanji said, his eyes turning to hearts immediately as he looked up at Miss All Sunday. Now, don't be so hasty. I haven't been given any orders. I have no reason to fight," she said honestly. As she said this though, Luffy felt the straw hat on his head fly off, watching as it flew into the woman's waiting hand. She spun it around, looking to Luffy now as she did. "So you're the infamous 11,097, the straw hat captain I've heard so much about." Monkey D. Luffy. There was a strange feeling in the woman now, like she was interested despite her outward appearance suggesting otherwise. Luffy only felt himself tense up though, his anger growing at the fact that this woman with dark colors and feelings had just stolen his hat, something that was extremely precious to him. "Give me my hat back," Luffy demanded, his voice quiet and low, yet threatening. His face only backed the tone of voice as he glared dangerously at Miss All Sunday. The tension was palpable for the crew as they looked between Luffy and Miss All Sunday. It wasn't often they saw Luffy anything but happy, so for him to be so angry was a little jarring. Miss All Sunday remained silent a moment, anything she had ready to say gone as she looked Luffy in the eye. Despite her expression remaining unchanged, Luffy could feel her emotions shift. She suddenly felt much more cautious than she had earlier, and maybe even a small bit nervous. "My, what an angry tone. I'm assuming this is important to you then?" she asked, smiling despite her inner feelings as she'd put the hat on top of her own. "How unlucky you are," She started, her words sounding like there was a meaning behind them that they weren't understanding. She looked Luffy in the eye for another minute before she tossed the straw hat back to him, the captain catching it easily and placing it on his head. You people who picked up a Princess Baroque works is out to kill. And a princess being protected by a mere handful of pirates. But what's even unluckier is the course your log pose indicates. Miss All Sunday began, her smile returning as wide as ever. Nami checked her log pose in worry, wondering what was so bad about its destination. The name of the next island is Little Garden. We don't even need to do anything, you'll be wiped out long before you can even reach Alabasta. She told them confidently, her eyes scanning over all of them. We won't, Luffy told her calmly, but just as confident as she had been. Perhaps not. Fate favors AD after all. However, fate hasn't seemed to favor you and your brothers all that much, has it? She asked, making Luffy bristle, his heart pounding faster. What's that supposed to mean? His tone was just as dangerous as it had been when he demanded his hat back. Nami and Usopp gulped nervously as the conversation progressed, all of them knowing that Luffy's past was not something the teen enjoyed talking about. Zoro shared in that worry, watching Luffy and the woman carefully, but not saying anything, while Sanji continued gawking at Miss All Sunday's beauty. Vivi, being new to the crew, had no idea what the significance behind the woman's words were, and so she listened on in lost confusion. To get caught up in such a place as the facility. Surely that wasn't the luck of AD that allowed that to happen. Miss All Sunday answered. And what do you know about facilities? Luffy asked, trying to keep calm but feeling his self-control slipping away faster and faster. More than I'm supposed to. More than your own crew it seems. In any case, maybe it was that same luck of AD that helped you and your brothers get out. The first children to escape a facility. She said, standing finally and turning to face the ocean. Perhaps Little Garden will be peaceful in comparison to such a place as the facility. If you do happen to survive, let's meet again. Miss All Sunday finished, turning to look at them over her shoulder. No, I don't think so, Luffy told her, never wanting to see this woman again. She nodded at his words, still smiling, before jumping over the railing. Let's go, Bunchy, she said as she landed on top of a large turtle beside the Mary. What is that? Zoro asked as he and Usopp went to look over the railing. Don't tell me it's a sea king. Usopp yelled fearfully. No, a turtle, Usopp realized, watching it slowly swim away from them. Luffy had yet to move though, still staring at the spot where Miss All Sunday had been sitting, his mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts. Behind him, Nami was watching in worry, noticing that he'd yet to move. Luffy, she asked cautiously, not wanting him to lash out at her. When he still didn't respond, everyone else turned to look as well. I don't like her, she's not a good person, Luffy eventually said, his voice still hard and low. Everyone was silent, not sure how to respond to that, but then Usopp piped up nervously from beside Zoro. Hey, can someone explain what's going on?